An entitled Karen demands that I destroy our equipment just to fit her needs, saying that if I don't do exactly as she says, she's not only going to leave bad reviews online, but she's also going to do whatever it takes to get me fired. And I'm honestly still baffled because this was the worst secondhand embarrassment I've ever experienced in my life, especially from a crazy Karen who literally did not know what she wanted. Here's how it all went down. Okay, to start things out, I work part-time at a local print shop while finishing school. It's usually pretty chill. I mean, people come in, make copies, print stuff off, they pay for their stuff, and then they leave. But last week, this entitled Karen came in and really tested my patience. She walked in with this massive stack of papers, at least 200 pages thick. She then puts it down on the counter and says that she needs it stapled. I look at this thing and it's clearly way too thick for a regular stapler. We have heavyweight staplers for bigger jobs, but this was beyond even that. I politely explained that our stapler can't handle something that thick, and then suggested that she might want to use binder clips or get like a spiral bound instead. Well, she tells me that's ridiculous and that I need to just make it work. I explain again that it would literally break our stapler, to which I then show her how thick the stack is compared to what the stapler can handle. Well, this entitled Karen then demands that I try anyway, where she says that when it breaks, the shop should give her a heavy-duty stapler to take home so that she can finish the job herself. She then said it's our fault for having inadequate equipment. Well, I just tell her absolutely not, and that if she really wants this stapled, she needs to find somewhere with industrial binding equipment. Well, when I said that, that's when she really lost it. She started yelling about customer service and how small businesses like ours don't deserve to succeed if we literally can't handle simple requests. She then demanded to speak to my manager, who wasn't even there, and threatened to go online and leave bad reviews. But worse still, she said she would tell all of her friends not to use our store, and I thought to myself, oh, please do, lady. The whole time, by the way, there's a line forming behind her, and people are clearly getting annoyed. This one guy finally speaks up and calmly tells her to either accept the alternatives or leave, because she is holding everybody up. She then spun around and told him to mind his own business, but you could tell she was getting very embarrassed. She grabbed her stack of papers and stormed out, but not before announcing loudly that she was going to corporate and that she would make sure I got fired, which is funny because this is not a chain that you can do that with. About an hour later, my manager comes back and I tell him exactly what happened. And you know what? He just laughs and says that he got a voicemail from some angry Karen ranting about staplers and demanding we deliver a new one to her house. Thankfully, he deleted it and we never really heard from this lady ever again. Okay, seriously, one of the comments of this post literally said, get a nail gun. That'll solve all her problems, and I think they might be right. Literally just shoot a nail gun through the papers and be like, here you go, thank you so much for your business. I can't stand people who act like this, by the way, who like literally don't see reason, and they're like, no, you need to break your equipment to give me what I need. If she's really got something that thick, then dude, just punch holes in it and put it in a binder. Like, that's gonna be way more effective than bothering everybody and being like, no, you need to destroy your equipment to make me happy, and if you don't, I'm gonna get you fired. So yeah, this Karen was being super dumb, and I'm so glad your manager was on your side, because the secondhand embarrassment from this was just too much, and I can only imagine being stuck in that situation. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to amithejerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. Am I the jerk for refusing to lend my friend money after I literally just paid off my own debt that I've been dealing with for a long time? Because right now, this friend is saying that I'm being stingy, and at this point, I really just don't know what to do. Here's what's going on. Okay, to start things out, I owe my mother around $7,000 because she paid part of my rent while I was in college, but I have now paid her back since last month, and I'm now free from any debt that I had. I always hated being in debt because it tarnishes my freedom of thought. I was really strict with finances, meaning I had no vacations, no fancy dinners, and I was cutting out all unnecessary costs. But finally, last month, I made my last payment, and it honestly felt like a huge burden was lifted off my shoulders. Now, 2 days ago on Friday, one of my closest friends, who is also generous, asked if I could lend him $1,000 since he is struggling with some bills at the moment. But the problem is that he has always been bad at managing his money. He does a lot of trips, buys a lot of clothing, buys a lot of bottles in the club, etc. Meanwhile, I live a pretty minimalistic lifestyle. I live in my own apartment and mostly cook at home with very rare occasional restaurant visits. So basically, I'm trying to exclusively spend money when I see others. And this is for when I'm ever asked if I want to meet up or hang out in some kind of way. Because when I'm alone, I'm living off of less than $500 a month if I can help it. Now, here's the issue at hand. He has taken care of the accounts when going out a few times already that were moderately high, all because of where he's taking me to, which are places that I didn't even want to go to in the first place. I do like him because he always wants me to have a great time and has asked me out several times, but I just can't can't shake the nagging thought that to lend him money now would ruin everything I had worked for. So when he asked me for $1,000, I hesitated. I told him honestly that I was not comfortable lending out money since I had just gotten debt-free myself. He then immediately got super upset, saying that after all the times he supposedly looked out for me and paid for stuff when we went out, that the least I could do was return the favor. And honestly, I was kind of convinced of this myself, but I tried explaining that it was not being generous, it was a principle. I mean, I hate being in debt, and I don't want to wait for someone else to even possibly pay me back. I also know how he spends money, and it can be crazy. Well, now he's giving me the cold shoulder, while another mutual friend said that I was being stingy when thinking of all the times he treated or spent money on me in the past. From my point of view, those nights were his choice. I never asked him to cover me or even get bottle service. But with that being said, I cannot deny that he has been generous in the past, and I genuinely do not want to be ungrateful. So seriously, am I the jerk for refusing to lend my friend some money, even though he's treated me many times before? What should I do? No, this is absolutely weird in my opinion. From the sounds of it, this guy doesn't actually like you in that way, but instead he sees your friendship as transactional. I don't know about you, but if I'm treating my friends for a night out and I'm paying for what they're getting, then that's a cost I'm willing to take on so that they can have a good time. I'm not gonna hold that over their head later on and be like, but what about all the times I've treated you? You should at least give me $1,000. That's just a little creepy in my opinion and just completely unnecessary. For me, it would almost feel like I set my friends up to be like, oh, now you have to give me money. Look at all the times I took you out for dinner. You don't want to be ungrateful, do you? I don't know. That would really leave a bad taste in my mouth, and I would really hate to have to deal with that. So no, I don't think you're the jerk. I think you're well within your right to turn this friend down, especially with the fact that you're finally able to save money. And if they can't understand that, then honestly, they can go to the friends that think you're being stingy and ask them for money instead of you. Because clearly, these people have the moral high ground, and I would love to see if they actually back that up. Am I the jerk for telling my sister that if she has a problem with how I'm raising her kid, she can literally step up and raise her herself? Because my sister has not been very involved in her daughter's life, leaving me and my parents to basically raise the kid while my sister does absolutely nothing. Here's what's going on. I'm a 19-year-old male and I live at home with my parents, my 24-year-old sister who I will call Ruth for the sake of the story, as well as her nearly 2-year-old daughter who I will call Scarlett for the sake of the story as well. Now, Ruth isn't exactly the greatest mother. She does whatever she wants to do, and Scarlett is more of an afterthought than anything to her. My parents and I are basically raising Scarlett at this point, and when Ruth decides that she wants to be a mother, she gets involved. I don't love it, but I have taken on a lot of responsibilities with my niece because I want her to have the best life possible, and I want positive influences to guide her. Yesterday morning, my niece was calling for me when she woke up from a nap, so I did the usual routine of changing her, reading to her, and then getting her a snack. About halfway through her snack, Ruth came downstairs, and when she noticed that I had given her bananas, she got mad. She said that I shouldn't feed her bananas because she'll just mush them into the high chair tray and it will be a bigger mess to clean up later. She said that it would make her life harder later and that I'm being very annoying. Now, when she said this, I told her that if she's got a problem with how I'm caring for and basically raising her child, then she can start looking after her herself. And also, let's face it, she probably wouldn't even be cleaning up the bananas later in the first place. When I said this, she got mad and said that I have no right to judge her parenting and that I simply do not know how hard it is being a single parent. So am I the jerk for talking to my sister like this? Because honestly, I'm still incredibly annoyed about this. Okay, I love this so much because seriously, what is your sister talking about? Dude, she's not even a parent. How could she sit there and be like, don't judge how I'm parenting my child? Because from the sounds of it, she's not doing anything. She's leaving it to you and your parents to raise this kid for her. She's not taking responsibility. She's not doing anything to be involved in the kid's life. And she's almost stepping up when it's convenient as opposed to doing it consistently like she's supposed to. Because holy crap, this kid should be calling for her mom and not for her uncle. What's going on right now? So no, you're not the jerk here. This is really stupid in my opinion. Because I 100% agree with the original poster. If your sister doesn't like the way that her kid's being raised, then guess what? She can step up and do it herself like she probably should have been doing from the very beginning. Am I the jerk for coming back home in the middle of a trip that I literally planned with all of my friends? Because now some of my friends are refusing to talk to me and saying that we can no longer be friends after I went right back home at the beginning of our trip. Here's what happened. I'm an 18-year-old female and I've been planning a trip with my friends for a bit now. We went back and forth for where to go and ended up deciding on a city in our country where people usually go on vacation. And this city is about 7 hours by car from where we live. We've been planning the trip during classes in the last year of high school, and back in the beginning of June, we paid for the buses as none of us had a license yet, as well as the apartment where we were going to stay, not to mention the aquapark entry fee as well. Now, I'm always a person who stresses too much, and since I'm the only one with experience traveling, I was the one with the most responsibilities in this trip. I had all the tickets and had had made the reservations as well. I had exams in June, and I barely slept because I kept stressing about the trip. And for reference, it was at the beginning of July, right after the last exam. So on the day before, I was very nervous, and I even threw up because of how stressed out I felt. I didn't sleep very well, and I woke up late, having to rush through getting dressed just to get to the place where we were catching the bus. Now, we were taking 2 buses there. The first one was a 3.5-hour trip to the capital of the country, and then another 3.5-hour trip to our destination. Now, I was feeling very bad on the first trip. I couldn't sleep, and I was feeling sick, and I couldn't even think about eating any food. In fact, I had not eaten for more than 12 hours. During the bus ride, I just crashed and told my friends that I couldn't do it, and that when we got to the capital, I was getting a bus back home. I explained how I was feeling, and one of my friends kind of understood, but the other 2 got really mad. When we got there, we said goodbye to each other, and I went to wait for my bus. Well, they went without me, and I felt like that was for the best because I would just ruin the vacation for them. For the whole week, I texted them every day to know if everything was okay, because I'd been the one planning everything, and when it came to answering those text messages, they were really dry about it. I didn't talk with them for the rest of the month, and they've even hung out several times without me. Recently, one of them, who probably is the most understanding, invited me to go to the bookshop with her, and since I missed them, I said yes. While we were hanging out, I was talking about how I haven't spoken with one of the girls since the trip, and that I was thinking of reaching out and texting her. Well, I did, and she texted the other 2 about it in a group chat that they clearly have without me involved in it. I tried to explain the situation better to her, but she just said I should have gotten medical help or medicine if I was feeling that bad, and she basically just said that we couldn't be friends anymore. Now, I still paid for my part in everything, and I basically lost out on like $300. But with all things considered, am I the jerk for prioritizing my mental health instead of my friendship by going on this trip? Because right now, I'm not sure if I made a mistake. Okay, in my opinion, I think everybody sucks here, and I want to explain why. First of all, if you knew you couldn't handle this kind of trip, then holy crap, you should not have planned this with these people. Like, this really was one of those situations where you need to be ready to go for 7 hours to make it to this destination. And the fact that you're handling all the stress of, like, I don't know, planning this stuff out, getting tickets, getting travel reservations, all that stuff, and yet you are the one who walks away and like runs off, all because you can't handle it. Like, I don't know about you, but if I was in that group and I saw that happen, I would be like, what the crap is going on right now? Why is she leaving suddenly? Like, she's the person who's planning all of this. So to that extent, I definitely understand where your friends are, where they're like, I can't be friends with you. You literally bailed at the last second on a trip that we planned all year. But on the other end of this, I don't think it's okay for them to be like, wow, you need to like take some medicine. Next time, just suck it up. Because that doesn't sound very friendly. Like, that doesn't sound like good friends at all. If they knew you and if they actually cared about you, then they would know that, hey, our friend here has some really bad anxiety and they're probably gonna have a panic attack. Maybe we should also carry the load here and try and help out instead of putting it all on her back. So I don't know, in my opinion, I think everybody sucks here and I think everybody has something they did wrong. Because this situation was a massive mess and I know I would be annoyed on both sides of this situation. An entitled boomer demands that I clean up all the shopping carts left behind by other shoppers inside the supermarket parking lot, saying that I'm the reason these shopping carts are all over the place, despite the fact that I was literally trying to back out my car and I literally didn't even use a shopping cart when I went into the store, leaving me completely baffled by this idiotic Karen. Here's how it all went down. Okay, so earlier today I went grocery shopping and I purchased one small bag of groceries without using a shopping cart. When I returned to my car after checking out, a shopping cart was sitting next to my car, pretty much touching it. I got annoyed being that today isn't windy at all and that the cart seemed to be meticulously placed there, and I knew I would not be able to pull my car out unless I moved the shopping cart. So I just moved the shopping cart onto a grassy median immediately in front of my car. Well, after I moved the shopping cart touching my car, an older woman putting things into her trunk approached me and told me, you know you're supposed to return your cart to the cart corral, right? I then answered affirmatively and I clarified to her that this isn't my shopping cart and I just found it here sitting next to my car, so I moved it so that I could pull out. She then proceeded to call me lazy and said that people like me are the reason why parking lots are littered with shopping carts. When she said this, I just ignored her, as this was not my shopping cart and I always return carts that I personally use to the corral. I then began walking towards the driver's side door of my car when I hear this woman telling another lady in a car who had her signal on to take her parking space, I'm not going to return my cart to the corral. I'll just leave it for you to take. Now, mind you, this woman waiting to park didn't even indicate that she needed or wanted a shopping cart. This boomer woman jumped into her car, started her engine, and then pulled out, glaring at me as she peeled off, leaving her cart in the middle of the street. I'm honestly so confused by this entire interaction, but please feel free to let me know if I was in the wrong, and if I should have just returned the cart to the corral, even though it wasn't mine and I ensured that it was secured in a grassy median as not to be swept away by the wind into another car. Either way, the hypocrisy is astounding and I honestly can't stand people like this. Dude, I am right there with you. This is so obnoxious. This Karen literally just wanted to complain about nothing. She saw you moving a cart and said, "Oh wow, you're the problem. By the way, I'm gonna do the same thing and leave. Gotta go, bye." Like, dude, she literally said and did the exact same thing she was complaining about. Like, talk about stupid. That or she's got like early stages of dementia or something like that. Like, that's just super annoying. So yeah, that lady was completely out of line and had no reason to talk to you like that in the slightest. Today, I messed up by blowing up my date's bathroom, where his toilet got so clogged up and flooded that I literally was standing in like ankle-deep water looking desperately for a plunger that he didn't have. And I seriously think I'll never live this down because this was the most horrifying situation of my entire life. Here's how it all happened. Want to start off by saying that yes, I think we all know where this is going already. I've been seeing this guy for like a month, and it's a new relationship, and it's really cute and all this other stuff. A huge storm knocked my power out for a few days, which also meant no bathroom for me. He got his power back before I did, invited me over, and since we hadn't really seen each other in almost 2 weeks, I decided to go. Now everything's fine. We get dinner, we hang out, things are really good, but then it's bedtime vibes. I go into his bathroom to shower and kind of prep a little, but then my body decides, nope, after 3 days of holding out, we're doing this right now. I literally had no choice. So I just sit there and I'm like, okay, fine. First time for everything, I guess. Flush number 1 gives me absolutely no problems. Flush number 2, the toilet makes an evil gurgle like it's laughing at me. And now I'm panicking. I start searching for a plunger, but there's nothing under the sink, nothing beside the toilet, nothing anywhere I can use. I even ran to the kitchen thinking that maybe there's some random one there, but no. He's in the other bathroom showering, so I'm like, maybe if I just flush it again, it'll go down. Well, this was a huge mistake because the third flush turned the toilet into a volcano. There was water everywhere, the towel was ruined, with me trying to stop the flood like an idiot. The bathroom floor is basically underwater, and I'm on the verge of crying while mopping with random towels. He then finishes his shower, and instead of just telling him, I yell something dumb like, "Oh, I'm just grabbing something from your bathroom real quick," so he doesn't immediately come in. I then finally cave and I ask him, "Okay, do you got a plunger?" But that's when he says no, he doesn't have one. At that point, I'm laughing and crying at the same time while begging him not to come in. I'm on my knees cleaning like a mad woman. Eventually, it looks normal enough, but yeah, there's no way I could even look him in the eye after that. Like, the night was just officially ruined. The next morning, I leave, completely mortified, and a couple of hours later, he texts me the following message. "I'm going to the hardware store to buy a plunger after flooding the bathroom again. I guess I needed one. And honestly, I wanted to disappear right off the face of the earth." Okay, that is literally like my worst nightmare. Going to someone's house and accidentally destroying their toilet, only for them to be like, "No, I don't have a plunger." And also, how does this guy not have a plunger, dude? That's like a staple in any household. Are you kidding me right now? You've got to have a plunger. Like, please have a plunger. I can't do this. So honestly, I wouldn't like beat yourself up over this. If he really is caring and like loves you and stuff like that, then he'll look past this and be like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. And from the sounds of it, it doesn't seem like this is something he's ever going to bring up. But regardless, yes, this is definitely a horrifying situation, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Am I overreacting at my father-in-law for literally trying to force my wife to drive on the highway for 6 hours right after she had a very bad car accident? Because he says unless we do exactly as he says, we will not be allowed to take his car anywhere even though we really need to use it, leaving me in a situation where I'm very frustrated and I just don't know what to do. Here's what's going on. So my wife was doing a 6-hour drive up to visit my in-laws with my daughter. 2.5 hours into the drive, she got into a car accident which completely totaled our car, and thankfully nobody got hurt. Luckily, I had my sister's car for the next 2 weeks while she was visiting my parents, so I was able to drive up and pick my wife up, deal with the insurance, and then drop her off there all before driving home that same night. My in-laws have 3 cars, despite there being only 2 people in their house, and one of them works from home. They were offering to let us borrow their 20-year-old Buick for a few months to save money and to buy a new car. Now, I was never a huge fan of this because I didn't feel like their car was safe, and because we are financially fine to buy a car now. But regardless, I agreed, because it wasn't that big of a deal and I didn't want to cause a fight over this right after the accident, which my wife was still sad about as it was kind of her fault. Well, now right before she's about to leave, she planned out a trip that would take an additional 4 hours just to avoid the back roads. She would stop halfway and stay with some family and then continue the next. She didn't feel comfortable driving on the highway just yet, but wants to in the future. Well, once my father-in-law heard about this, he said that unless she drove the whole 6 hours on the highway, he wouldn't let her borrow their car. Well, I'm absolutely livid at him right right now because there is zero reason for him to demand this. I know my mother-in-law is pissed, but he kind of controls the marriage, and that's a whole other discussion in and of itself. I don't even care about the car. It's just the fact that he's completely ignoring the feelings of his own daughter and brushing them off like it's stupid. So I really need to know, am I overreacting at the fact that my father-in-law is not thinking of my wife and instead trying to force her into something she's not comfortable with? Because right now I really don't know what to do. Okay, first of all, yeah, your father-in-law is crazy. This is a really dumb request, and the fact that he's trying to enforce it in some way is just so silly to me. But seriously, if I was in your shoes, I would straight up lie to this idiot. I would tell him, oh yeah, don't worry about it, we'll drive the full 6 hours, and then just book a hotel halfway through. There's no way I would ever tell him the truth. I would go do my own thing. What's he gonna do? Does he have GPS on the car? Seriously, there's no way he's gonna know what you do and don't do with that car. He's also not about to follow you wherever you go and be like, okay, get on the highway. I'm gonna make sure you're doing this for the next 6 hours. You better do it. I don't know, maybe he is that level of crazy, but I just can't imagine a rational person spending that much time just to make sure their car goes exactly where they want. Because personally, and yes, I would respect the vehicle, but the second someone says, yes, you can borrow my car, I'm gonna use it for whatever I need to. And if that means taking a 4-hour detour just so I feel safe after a car accident, then guess what? That's exactly what I'm gonna do. And there's literally nothing you can do about it. So yeah, in my opinion, I would absolutely lie to them and I would just be like, oh sure, we'll do it, just to make sure I can get the car and actually use it the way I want to. The other solution is just going there and picking her up. That might be the better of the two evils, because then you can avoid your father-in-law's weird controlling attitude and you can get your wife and get her home and not have to worry about any of this crap. Because I think your father-in-law is being a weirdo and that is not something you should ever have to deal with.
Entitled boss makes me run a department alone, so I quit around the holidays. I, 37 female, was working at a homegrown company for 15 years. I first started off as a sales associate and made my way up the corporate ladder. After 6 months, I was working as a salesman. I got promoted to assistant supervisor, then supervisor, followed by a branch manager, and then area manager after that. Several years later, the head of marketing department, who was the owner's wife, decided to recruit me to their team. I decided to give it a go since I was already feeling burnt out at the sales department. I asked my direct boss, Debbie, for her approval and to let her know that an offer was given to me. She wasn't given a heads up by the bosses, by the way. They just decided to talk to me directly. Anyways, she gave me the go-ahead signal and I got the job in the marketing department as a graphic designer and I was happy for a while. Although I got to work directly under the owner's wife, let's call her Brenda, who had a lot of episodes of shouting and throwing stuff at us when she didn't like the ideas we presented to her, I sucked it up because I actually liked my coworkers. She was just so terrifying to work with that we felt happy whenever she wasn't around, and we felt even more productive when she wasn't breathing down our necks. Whenever Brenda wasn't around, the head of HR department, let's call her Lizzie, would make it her personal business that we were all in our seats doing work-related stuff and not talking. She would also point out stuff in our office saying papers needed to be put away or turning on all the lights despite us saying we prefer to be working in dim lighting. Just some irritating things that ticked you off, but we carried on. Cue the pandemic. Remember when I said I was a graphic designer? Well, this is when everything became hell. We first worked from home and we used WeChat for our logins. Aside from chatting in, we were also required to send selfies out of ourselves in our workstation to Lizzie. No problem, a small thing to do before we work on our tasks. Everything was fine and dandy despite all the backhanded comments that Lizzie was saying, whether it was true that we are in our workstations or we could be outside. She claimed that she had seen several of us at the grocery store during her leave, but never said who it was, so we just shrugged it off. I never left my house anyways, since I was living with my grandparents, my mother, my sister, and her toddler plus an infant. When we were asked to return to the office, resignation letters came one after the other in my department until basically I was the only one left. Everybody got scared to go outside since the vaccines weren't available yet as of this time. Since I was the only one left in my department, I was given the task of updating the website, despite not knowing anything about it, managing all social media pages, all 20 of them, doing the layouts for all the social media channels, doing the product shoots to sell them online, assisting online customers, ringing up their purchases, performing the ad hoc cashier task, going to the nearest courier to ship them out, it's a 20-minute walk from our office, and doing all the main pages live selling. From a 6-person team, it became just one person doing all the tasks. I know what you're thinking, why didn't I just resign right there and then? My mother was laid off from her job as a restaurant manager, and my sister's husband, who works overseas, had to cut back his hours due to the skeletal staffing they had to be placed under just so no one would get laid off at their company. So my income, along with my sister's husband's monthly deposits, was the only money sustaining us for the time being. I barely take any breaks, and most of my tasks were being left undone due to the high volume of orders we had been getting online. I still made sure to do other tasks during my off-peak hours, but I kept my phone on me more frequently as customer inquiries aren't dwindling down. Brenda promised she'd get someone else from other departments to help me out, but no one came. Lizzie told me someone is coming soon, but still nobody came. During this time, Brenda never went back to the office since she was afraid of being exposed and exposing her twins, both still toddlers, and her mother-in-law, who was a germaphobe. So she asked Debbie to step in to supervise me. Now, Debbie was a great supervisor. During my time with the sales team, she gave me stellar reviews, and I always passed our evaluations with flying colors. This time, however, she seemed out to save her own skin since she was from the sales team. She'd look for other people to blame for lower sales. She, along with Lizzie, mentored me and played good cop and bad cop. Now remember, I was already doing the jobs of a whole department. I was a single person doing a 6-person job. Never received any bonuses or salary raise. I was earning just a little over $200 per month. I'm not in the US, but if I convert my salary to dollars, it's about that much. During this time, they hired a new person to do the website. Let's call him IT. So updating the website was already off my hands. They decided to give this guy a salary of $600. $600 to take a single task off my hands. I was hurt. I've been with the company longer and worked my butt off and did not even receive a $50 salary increase. They made me decide to start looking for a better paying job where I would be appreciated more. Now this IT guy looked up to me since I was older than him and also have been with the company longer than him. We became friends. I did not hold a grudge against him for getting a bigger paycheck than me since it wasn't his fault. Lizzie thought that they would have him spy on me, but instead he became my inside guy. He would tell me that whenever I would leave my workstation to get water or relieve myself, Lizzie would immediately come and look for me. I know he's telling the truth since it has been confirmed by both myself and our other colleagues. One time I went to the comfort room, and Lizzie followed me to make sure I was only going to the comfort room and not somewhere else to play hooky. I was told several times from others that she was looking for me, and when I would go to her office to ask if she needed anything since they told me she had been looking for me, she'd only say, "Oh, nothing. I don't need it anymore." Take note that this would happen more than once a day. One day, Debbie sat me down and asked me what was up and why I haven't been performing my tasks very well. I stared at her and surely she couldn't be serious. Excuse me? Brenda and Lizzie are concerned because you've been performing poorly. The social media pages are a mess and they haven't been updated. Have you forgotten that aside from my old tasks that I have been doing more now that I'm basically alone in the department? I have more tasks under my belt than I can manage. Yes, I did tell them about that. It's just that, well, they are also concerned that you have been going out a lot. Yes, to deliver the items our customers order to the carrier since we're not qualified for pickup. Debbie grimaced at this point. Lizzie actually saw you in an establishment that's not the carrier. Where? At the pharmacy? Well, pardon me for buying medicine for my headache instead of calling in sick for the day. Oh, I see. I guess she misunderstood. Okay, don't worry about the additional staff. Lizzie is currently interviewing applicants to replace those who left your department. After hearing this, I felt horrible. I felt like I had CCTV on me at all times. I even felt that going downstairs to get water was a crime. I was truly miserable, but all of my job searches were turning up nil. IT guy was the one doing the meetings with the other departments now since I was too busy with the online orders. One time he told me of this conversation between Brenda and another department head, the boss's sister, Sam. Who is Debbie's boss? Why aren't the pages being updated? I don't know, that's OP's job. Is she not working? She says she's busy. Why? What is she busy with? I don't know. Brenda says this in a sing-song voice while looking down at her nails. This was later confirmed to me by Lizzie's assistant, who is one of my work best friends, and all my former teammates from the sales department who were present during the meeting. I made a lot of friends on the sales team, and they remain loyal to me since most of the existing supervisors and assistant supervisors were trained by me. But boy was I mad. Now during the pandemic, we were required to fill out a form listing all of the tasks that we worked on. We would tick them off or put a note beside it if it was still in progress, disapproved, approved, etc. We also had weekly meetings which I attended all the time just to let them know what I had been working on. And Brenda would add new tasks for me. There was no way she wouldn't know what I was working on. This spurred me to look for another job fast. Now, during this time, I was able to get a part-time job where I worked 4 hours a day, but still received twice my monthly salary. This allowed me to save up for a good computer so I could pursue my dream of being free of shackles that bound me to a miserable job. I bought myself a computer. Companies began hiring more once I started sending out resume after resume. As soon as I got home late in the evening, I was job hunting. I finally got accepted into a foreign company that paid me in dollars. I was offered more than thrice my previous salary because of my skills. Now to start my revenge. I did not submit my resignation just until I had a job offer signed and sealed. I made sure to cover all the bases. Come a few days before Christmas, the job offer was finally in my inbox. I was only too happy to sign it and send it back to the new company. Christmas morning, I gave my 2 weeks notice to Brenda, CC'd Lizzie, and Debbie. I did not hear anything from them until the day after Christmas. Debbie called me. I don't recall the exact conversation we had, except I just told her that I had been offered a job with a higher salary. She did ask me if I'd be interested in staying if they matched the salary offer, to which I replied no, because I don't need to work in a toxic environment where I'm constantly being watched and scrutinized by the heads. She also told me that Brenda was panicking and was shouting at Lizzie, telling her to do something to make me stay. They both thought it was the best idea to have Debbie talk to me before doing anything. Anyway, I told her that my mind was made up, which she respected, and told me that we'll have to see each other a week after the new year. Now for my 2 weeks notice, I specified that they'd be covering all holidays, so by the time we went back to work, I only had several days left to turn over everything. On my last day, we had a Zoom call with Brenda where I told all my colleagues goodbye and wished them well. Lizzie jokingly asked me, "You really won't change your mind? Is that your final answer?" No, I won't change my mind. I don't see any problem with leaving since apparently I haven't been doing anything. The look on Brenda's face was priceless. I smiled at her and proceeded to walk to our server where we log out. I left the building with a spring in my step and my shoulders felt like a huge boulder had been lifted off of them. My mother and sister even commented that I seemed happier now since I got back to singing and whistling and dancing in my chair while working. Now all my friends gave me updates once in a while. Lizzie's assistant tells me that several people were hired to do all my tasks and that Brenda has been feeling frustrated. She had been asking other people who were in charge of things and she always fumed whenever they would tell me that I was the one in charge. But let me know. Am I the jerk? I don't know about you, but I was freaking out the moment I heard this OP said that they were getting paid $200 for all the work they were doing, even with them not living in America. But this story goes to show you that it doesn't matter what company or field you work in, when people quit, management will always dump more tasks on people and never get them help. This happened countless times at my old job until I refused to do more work without getting paid more. My refusal lasted a few months until they finally decided to open up some new lead positions that would pay respectable wages. I've said this a million times on the Jerk channel, know your worth when it comes to working for a company. Most see you as a number and easily replaceable. So make sure you're happy where you work, or the stress might just eat you alive. Boss says I have to scan packages before I load them, then gets mad when I refuse to load unscanned packages. First things first, a little backstory. I work as a package handler at a large hub facility of a well-known shipping company, spending many days loading residential delivery trucks. The packages come with a special barcode on the side, as well as small spot labels that allow someone to see the address and which truck they go on. We used to have small scanners that would scan the barcodes in order to ensure that we didn't put the packages on the wrong trucks or get a package that didn't belong, as sometimes the labels could get lost or packages could get the wrong spot label. The truck is even fitted with a small door with side sensors, so if you scan a package and try to walk into a truck where it doesn't belong, the scanners would start whining. Now let's move on to the main antagonist of the story, Alan, my former supervisor. Alan is a short, skinny guy with a thin mustache and is a micromanager at the highest degree. He always walked up and down the trucks to watch us work. Also watched us from a distance and close by with his arms crossed to get us to work faster. Always constantly told us to grab all of our packages as they came to us, despite the fact that they go around on a moving conveyor belt that literally loops them back if we miss them. He always told us to load up our largest packages as soon as we get them, even though it makes it harder to move through the trucks, and place other packages on the shelves, and had the tendency to hop into a worker's truck to move packages around the right way, aka his way. I can go on and on about Alan, but today I'm here to vent about one of these events, or we would be here all day. So anyways, Alan had me and all the other package handlers of our area in a group texting chat in order to tell us our start times for the next shift, as well as to compare our work speeds to each other via our scanning count. I assume to make us feel bad and work harder, but we don't really care. Around that time, the number of packages we missed loaded onto our trucks, as we call it, and ever since, Alan has been adding this to the group messages that we can scan every package and make sure that we aim for 0 misload. Annoying, but nothing too serious, at least I thought. So one day I was working on the belt as usual, and my scanner suddenly decides to screw up on me, as they tend to do if I smack it or if the battery comes loose. I go to Alan and ask him if he could help me fix it or give me a new one to use. Instead, he takes it and tells me to keep loading my truck without the scanner and just to use the labels on the packages. This isn't really allowed, and instead I choose to stack the packages in front of the trucks so I can scan them once I get a new scanner. Alan eventually comes down and tells me just to load them into the trucks normally and stop stacking. Frustrated, I just shrug and do it to try to avoid any real conflict. That evening, Alan messages the group and lists our speeds with me at the bottom and is once again spouting on that we need to make sure we are scanning our packages before loading them, and even comes to talk to me the next day about a number of misloads. I'm angry, of course, as he is the one to tell me, but at that point I was still fairly new to the job and didn't feel comfortable arguing with the supervisor, so I just try to continue on with my work with the mental note of always scanning my packages no matter what, so he can't pull this again, unaware that this would be my malicious compliance later on. Fast forward a few months later, Alan is leaving for real estate and is training one of the package handlers to be his replacement before he leaves. By that time, I am fed up with all the micromanaging and pestering and can't wait for him to be gone. It's about the final week of his employment that I'm working the belt, and once again my scanner frigs up and stops working. I hand it over to Alan once again, and just like before, as if he never cared about scanning, he tells me to keep loading the trucks. I smile to myself and nod, so I continue stacking my packages in front of my trucks, waiting for a new scanner to arrive. Not long after, Alan comes back with the trainee at his side. He asks me what I'm doing, and I tell him that I'm stacking my packages. Once more, he tells me to keep loading my trucks, and this time I talk back, telling him I'm not loading them without a scanner. I have to admit, at this time, I was done with Alan and I let my anger get the better of me, raising my voice and getting a bit snarky, as I have very hard time dealing with anger, especially after dealing with this crap for so long. The trainee tries to settle the situation and tells me to keep just stacking and they'll get me a new scanner right away, but is interrupted by Alan telling me once again to load my trucks, this time louder. I flatly respond no, and this goes back and forth like this for nearly half a minute, before I eventually tell him to go get it in writing because I'm not getting fired over this. Remember, we are not supposed to load a package without scanning it, and can indeed get in trouble if they can prove that we did it intentionally. This seems to get him even more mad, but he eventually tries to pull a head supervisor card. He asked me if he should go get the head supervisor to try and intimidate me, I guess. I wasn't able to chuckle in my anger, but I just told him to go ahead and get him. Him and the trainee walked off with him storming down the belt. A few minutes later, the trainee comes back with the scanner in hand, apologizing and telling me just to get back to work. I didn't see Alan for the rest of the day, and if memory serves me right, the rest of the week as well. Sorry if this is not an explosive as some of the other posts, but this was just my first real malicious compliance. And to any supervisors reading this, please just let us do our freaking jobs, but let me know. Am I the jerk? I'm not gonna lie, I hate working with people that need to have things done their way. Like, I'm guilty of having my own ways of working, but I wouldn't push my ways of working onto others, unless their ways were ridiculously slow or hurt production. My mindset is always, as long as the job gets done right and on time, I don't care how it gets done. But sometimes supervisors feel the need to push their ways on others because I guess it makes them feel useful, but who knows? Let me tell you about the time I pissed off my base commander. When I was 20, I got drafted into the army. I live in the Netherlands, and this happened in the 80s. I got trained to be an ambulance driver. 2 months of general training, learned how to drive a Land Rover, and 2 months of medical training. After that, I was ready to take on any medical emergency that came my way. After my training, I got placed in staff support platoon, a mismatch of different roles that are there to support the higher army staff in whatever they needed. Make coffee, admin, drive them around, tech support, etc. I was their ambulance driver. It was pretty helpful when we were at war, but there was no use for me during the peacetime. After I got settled on base where I got stationed, I was called in by my lieutenant. I had been volunteered to work at a small local military post on our base. I was okay with it as it gave me something to do during the time I had to serve in the army. It was a small post with a clinic, one permanent doctor and one drafted right out of medical school, and several other grunts like me. Downstairs was our clinic and a few rooms to treat patients. Upstairs, about 12 beds for patients who were sick, but not bad enough that they had to go to a real hospital. We worked at the clinic and took care of the patients upstairs, and maybe 2 or 3 times a week I had to pull out the ambulance for use. More often than not, for a planned trip to transport a patient to or from an actual hospital. I started with the rank of soldier, and I was expected to end my 1-year career at the rank of corporal. As you can imagine from the title, that never happened. I did not hate working at the post. On the contrary, I actually felt like I did something useful. And while I was stationed at the post, I learned many practical medical skills while having other soldiers to practice on. But it was a waste of my time. I wanted to start my IT career, and this was holding me back. I also didn't care much about the hierarchy or the ranks. I respected my fellow army men and women for who they were, their actions, and how they treated others, not by the number of bars or stars and stripes. And being an actual medic on our base, I got away with that. We had no roll calls. I slept in a 2-person bedroom instead of the 12-person one my platoon mates had to use. No inspections, no military training, and wearing white instead of green. Anyways, on to the malicious compliance. I was tending to a patient at the medical clinic. He and his buddy had walked into a door, their words, and it had a glass window that shattered and cut them both up. One pretty bad, and the other was treated by our doctor in one of the other rooms as he needed quite a few stitches. I had to stay in the clinic, and as the other soldier only had minor cuts, I treated him on the spot. As no other medical staff was available at the time, the slightly larger cuts I glued shut. For others, a band-aid would suffice. He was sitting in one of the chairs and I was on one knee in front of him, taking care of the cut on his leg as I heard somebody walk into the clinic. Without looking up, I was holding a glued cut together with my fingers until it had set. I politely asked to please have a seat and that I would be right with them.
Do you know who I am? I'm the base commander, Colonel so-and-so.
Yes, he actually said that. I can still hear it in my head 35 years later. His booming, indignant voice, full of air on how important he was. I was not impressed at all, mostly annoyed by his attitude, and told him, "Congratulations, please have a seat. I'll get to you once I'm finished treating the cuts I'm working on." This was not what he wanted to hear. He started chewing me out. Finally, I was done with the cut and let go of my fingers and got up. Ignoring his barrage, I asked him how I could help.
I need to speak with the doctor. I have an appointment.
Okay, so not an emergency. I explained to the colonel that the doctor was treating a patient who needed urgent medical attention and that he would have to wait until the doctor finished his treatment. He is having none of it and tells me he does not have the time to wait, then orders me to tell the doctor that he has a 3 p.m. appointment and is waiting for him. I knew the doctor would drop everything and be running to the colonel if he got wind of who was actually in the waiting room. He didn't have much of a spine, and his career was primarily based on the colonel's input and assessment of him. But the colonel had given me an order, so I had to do it. So I went to the treatment room and put my head in. The doctor was busy stitching up a more injured soldier, and I complied with the colonel's order. "Doctor, your 3 p.m. appointment has arrived." The doctor, not realizing or remembering who his 3 p.m. appointment was, told me irritably to have the patient wait until he was finished, and that it could be another 5 to 10 minutes. He repeated what he told me several times before, to only disturb him for emergencies. I go back to the colonel and tell him that the doctor is still busy treating the patient and would be available in about 10 minutes. The colonel was not happy and told me to go get the doctor now. I told the colonel that I had explicit instructions to only disturb the doctor in case of emergency, and this appointment was not an emergency. He would have to wait. He grumbled, but in the end, sat down until the doctor arrived. He started berating the doctor about how precious his time was and how he had made him wait. The doctor apologized and almost groveled as they moved into the doctor's office. I had to go upstairs for something, and the colonel had already left after I got down. I did get a good ear washing from the doctor telling me that I should have mentioned to him that it was the colonel who was waiting for him. I argued that it shouldn't have mattered who was waiting if he was treating a patient, who was bleeding all over the place, and that he told me himself that he could only be disturbed for emergencies. As you might imagine, I never got that promotion to corporal or even soldier first class. Oh well, But let me know, am I the jerk? I would have never cut it in the military. I'm so much like the OP. I don't do well with orders from other people who think they're important just because of rank. I prefer to judge people off their personality and actions. Also, much like the OP, I'm pretty sure I would have done exactly what they did in this situation. People who need help should come before those who have valuable time. Karen coworker tries to abuse days off, so I get her to retire. My friend, who I'll call Sandy, worked at a travel agency in British Columbia, Canada. It was a small owner-operated business with the owner and 3 employees, including my friend. Everyone worked Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. One of my friend's coworkers, I'll call her Jane, an older woman in her early to mid-60s, was a longtime nuisance employee. Among her other sketchy behavior, Jane was always scamming ways to take time off and on top of her officially paid vacation time. In order to make up for lost hours, she would claim overtime hours / pay by supposedly going into the office in her off hours to finish up work without being requested by the owner to do so. Despite being caught in her own lies on a number of occasions and being warned about trying to claim for unsanctioned overtime, the owner of the travel agency was reluctant to officially reprimand Jane or get rid of her. The reason being is the owner discovered after she had hired Jane that Jane had actually been fired from her previous job at another local travel agency for pulling the same stunts. However, Jane had sued her former employer for unfairly dismissal and she won the settlement. After a few years of my friend Sandy working at the travel agency, the owner was ready to retire and offered to sell the business to my friend. Sandy took her up on the deal and took over the business while keeping Jane on and the other employee. Once again, just as the previous owner was afraid to get rid of Jane, so was Sandy for the fear of being sued. When Sandy took over the business, she instituted guidelines regarding taking time off and she established an official no overtime policy. Jane would still try with her shenanigans, but was far less successful in getting what she wanted with my friend in charge. However, Jane still had one trick up her sleeve when she wanted to take time off on a whim. Sandy was a divorced single mom of 2 boys who was heavily involved in youth hockey. She would sometimes leave the office an hour or 2 before closing to get her boys to the hockey practice or a game. In order to avoid requesting in person and potentially being denied, Jane would wait for Sandy to be out of office to book the day off if she didn't feel like coming into work or had made plans. Sandy would arrive at work the next morning only to discover that Jane wasn't coming in. Despite this happening numerous times, Sandy would usually let it slide since there was now a definite no overtime policy. Therefore, Jane could no longer claim to come into work on the weekend or after hours in order to try to make up for the day off. She would either miss out on a day's pay, in turn saving Sandy money as an owner, or it would come out of her remaining paid vacation days. Moreover, 2 people in the office at the time could usually handle everything. Jane not coming in was really a no-loss situation for Sandy. There was one time, however, when Sandy was going to be away for 1 or 2 work days just before the weekend to take her boys to a hockey tournament. She told both Jane and the other employee both verbally and in writing that she could not book off for those dates in question since she would be away and needed both of them in the office. Within a few days of giving this notice, Sandy went into the office on a Saturday to do some paperwork and go through the sales for that week. This is when she discovered that only the day before, Jane had booked a trip for her daughter and son-in-law to Vegas, as well as a plane ticket in her name to Calgary where her daughter lived. Both the trip to Vegas and the ticket to Calgary coincided with the dates that Sandy said she would be out of the office. Sandy then checked the vacation booking schedule to further discover that Jane had indeed booked the days off that she had expressly told her she couldn't have. Not mentioning she had discovered the traveling Jane had booked for herself and her daughter, Sandy emailed Jane telling her she would have to deny her the days off since she had already been told that they were unavailable because she, Sandy, would be away and needed Jane in the office. Through a continued series of email exchanges, Jane replied and outright lied to Sandy with some excuse about her daughter getting some long-awaited medical treatment or surgery, and she needed to go to Calgary to help out for a few days and look after her granddaughter. Sandy replied that this is a lie by telling Jane she knew about the trip she had booked to Vegas for her daughter and son-in-law. That Jane's trip to Calgary was most likely to babysit her granddaughter while her daughter was in Vegas, and that she still had to deny Jane the days off, especially since she booked them after being told they were unavailable. Jane countered in a subsequent reply, without addressing that she had even been caught in a lie, that she had been a dedicated employee of the travel agency for several years and couldn't understand why she is being treated so unfairly after all she had done for the business. She then wrote since she wasn't being treated as a value employee that she had no choice but to retire and was giving her 2 weeks notice. Despite Jane's threat, Sandy replied that she will still be unable to grant her days off and left it at that without making any mention of Jane's threat to quit/retire. Sandy then contacted her accountant, who also acted as her de facto business advisor, and explained what had just happened with Jane. Also aware of Jane's previous shenanigans, Sandy's accountant told her that this was the out she had been looking for with Jane, and that she had it all in writing. He told her that Jane had essentially resigned/retired, and all Sandy needed to do was honor Jane's desire to do so. Let her finish out her 2 weeks, or pay her 2 weeks' wages in lieu of no further severance pay legally required since she hadn't been fired. That following Monday, Sandy went into the office early accompanied by her long-term boyfriend to act as a witness. She put Jane's belongings from her desk into the box and took the things that were property of the business. Since Jane was old school and had resisted inputting clients' information into computer databases, this also included a small box filled with index cards which had clients' phone numbers, addresses, credit card information, and other personal information noted on them. In the meantime, the other employees had arrived for work and they all awaited Jane to show up. Jane had arrived just before 9 a.m., acting as though nothing had happened and greeted everyone with a "good morning" as she walked through the door. However, she was apparently taken slightly aback when she noticed Sandy's boyfriend seated in the far corner of the office. At this point, Jane was midway to her desk when Sandy informed her that there was no need to go any further and that she had accepted Jane's notification of retirement. She then handed Jane a check compensating for the hours she had worked in the current pay period, as well as 2 weeks' wages in lieu of Jane finishing out her final 2 weeks before her retirement. Jane was dumbfounded and went into panic mode. "But I didn't retire! I'm not ready to retire!" Sandy responded that indeed she had retired, given her notice and had proof of it in writing. All Jane could do was continue repeating, "But I didn't retire, I'm not ready to retire," while unsuccessfully attempting to get the support of other employees who refused to come to her defense. Sandy then pointed to the box containing Jane's belongings, wished her a happy retirement, and told her to leave the office. Jane quickly rifled through the box and noticed that the small box containing the index cards with the client information was not there. She insisted that Sandy return it to her, which Sandy refused to do, explaining that that was property of the business containing personal client information and that she would be in violation of Canadian privacy laws if she were to let Jane take it. Jane's shock had now turned into obstinance and she refused to leave without the box. Both the other employee and Sandy's boyfriend started to get involved, repeatedly telling Jane to just leave. Sandy informed Jane that if she didn't leave, she would end up calling the RCMP, Canadian Police, at which point Sandy's boyfriend dialed 911 to inform the dispatcher of a disgruntled former employee at XYZ travel agency who was refusing to leave the premises. Within a few minutes, 2 police officers arrived, and Jane immediately ran to the door ranting about being fired and about missing a box of client information. In order to de-escalate the situation, one police officer told Jane to come outside and explain to him her side of the story. The other officer remained in the office to hear Sandy's side of the story, agreeing that Jane was not legally entitled to the box of client info. The other officer then re-entered the business and told Jane to wait outside. He said that Jane was insisting that Sandy was holding on to personal belongings, namely a box of important information. Both Sandy and the officer who had spoken to her explained the contents of the box to the other officer, who in turn agreed it was not Jane's property. The police officers then picked up the larger box of Jane's personal belongings, took it outside to Jane, and told her that she needed to go home. To rub salt in Jane's wounds, the next day, Sandy put up a large sign in the window of the business congratulating Jane on her retirement, and even put a small announcement in the local newspaper doing the same thing. Lastly, the icing on this piece of revenge cake was when Sandy was filling out the necessary government forms for when an employee quits, gets fired, or retires, made sure to check the box labeled retired for the reason why Jane is no longer being employed. By doing so, Jane was ineligible to collect unemployment insurance benefits. But let me know, am I the jerk? This is one of those times that I enjoy hearing about a boss getting the better of one of their employees. I'm not sure if anyone listening to this has had to deal with someone like this Jane character, but man, when you work with people that don't want to work but want to get paid, it sucks pretty bad. I used to work with some people that abused the short-term disability a lot at my old job. They would disappear for months at a time, and when they returned, they weren't much help because we knew that they were going to be gone after a while back on short-term, or they would end up being let go. But this could take up to 6 months to a year at some times. So I know all too well what this OP was talking about in this story. This is the story of my first boss and how he screwed over the new boss by giving us every certification. When I was 14 years old, I got my first summer job and had one of the best bosses I've ever had. I found out recently that unfortunately my mentor and someone I would consider a friend, John, passed away. Although it's been well over 20 years, I still use the lessons learned and the work ethic he passed on to me. Although at times he could be hard, he was more than fair and always did the right thing for those who worked for him. This is the story of John versus the new president. Let me give some background and context on John. John was the textbook all-American boy. John had attended a prestigious boarding school somewhere in New England and eventually attended Yale back in the late 50s or 60s, and was not only a scholar but a three-sport athlete. He played football, he boxed, and was the captain of the track and field team. Fast forward to when the story takes place, and John is still in phenomenal shape for a late 60s and early 70s man. John opted to move out to the country, start a family, and follow his passion, which was teaching at the local high school and coaching high schoolers in various sports. Obviously, he was the high school football coach, taught track and field, and was an outstanding shot put athlete and could run a mile and many other long distances. As a teacher, he had the summers off and became a lifeguard at the local town beach, eventually becoming the captain of the lifeguards. Over time, he developed standards for the town, county, state lifeguards to pass. He really transformed what was a ragtag style of lifeguards into a full-fledged official lifeguard corps, training academy, and set the standards for what is still used today. John was eventually hired to run the lifeguards and manage the entire private beach club instead of working for the town beach. One of the biggest challenges of this, since it was a private beach club, John now reported into a president of the beach club who oversaw how things were run. I started working for John as a helper on the beach and then eventually a lifeguard, and for the first couple of summers things were great. The president of the beach club took pride in having the best staff and making sure that lifeguards were well paid, and to his credit, safety was the utmost priority. The private beach club certainly catered to the more wealthy clientele who wanted a nicer beach instead of going to the public beach. Some of the advantages were the amenities, which were the lockers, cabanas, private parking, and very nice restaurants that served great food and drinks. This was one of the few beach clubs that also had the ability to serve booze. One of the good things John had instituted was any returning member of the staff from the previous summer automatically got a raise. This ensured that the staff returned the next summer, avoiding a lot of retraining, and also you could imagine growing pains with new staff. What was even better was that if you returned multiple summers, you still got an additional raise. Most summers this was $1 or $2. As example, I started at $7.25 at 14 years old. This was back in the late 90s. But by the time I was in college, I was making almost $15 an hour. Typically, the president of the club serves a term, which is a few years, and when his term was up, a new president was ushered in. Upon taking office, the new president loudly proclaimed that he wanted to ensure that the club had fiscal responsibility, and he would be personally going over the books with a fine-tooth comb. His first order of business was to cut everyone's pay all the way back to minimum wage and fire most of the lifeguards. Now, as noted above, the staff was there for a very long time, knowing most of the members and how to run the place. Prior to the start of the summer, upon learning that their hourly wages would be cut, most of the senior staff immediately left and were quickly hired elsewhere. The lifeguards were spread at the appeal of John to ensure safety. Although some senior guards left for other beaches and pools, John was able to convince some lifeguards as he would take care of things. On to the malicious compliance. While John agreed to have the staff take a pay cut, he convinced the new president that any lifeguard with additional certifications would get $2 an hour on top of the base minimum wage. The new president obviously didn't consider that any of these lifeguards would put in the effort, or if it was feasible, to get any certifications in the time for the summer season, and he agreed to the plan. Now, as you can imagine, John basically established the process and the curriculum for becoming a lifeguard, and personally trained and hired most, if not all, the trainers in the town and county. John was also a volunteer fireman and knew all the EMS personnel, and not surprisingly had either taught them in school or hired them as lifeguards in their past lives. John quickly called in favors from every trainer and certifier across the county, who was more than happy to repay all the favors John had done for them in the past. Most waived the training fees and expedited the training sessions for the lifeguards, and they wanted to promote safety for the community. Prior to the start of Memorial Day weekend, and what was effectively the unofficial start of the summer, all of us lifeguards and new staff became certified in pretty much every single possible certification that existed at the time. I mean, I'm talking crazy complete overkill and unnecessary certifications for a regular lifeguard. We got trained as EMS and EMTs. Although lifeguards had to be certified in CPR, we retrained and got CPR certifications again, lifeguards oceans and pool rescue techniques, certified swimming instructors, certified food inspectors, the club had a kitchen, certified county pool operation license, certified sanitary inspection, which was cleaning bathrooms. We even had one guy who wanted to learn how to scuba. The county firefighters had a water rescue team who coincidentally was certified in scuba instruction. Most of us guards became certified divers, open water divers, deep water rescue divers, the whole works. I could go on and on about all the certifications we got. The lifeguards not only went back to their original wage, but in most cases went well above what their previous wages were. At 18 years old and back in the 90s, I personally went from making $15 an hour to $27 an hour, all due to the certifications and training. It took a month or so for the fallout to happen. While the new president tried to renege on the deal, John was smart enough to have a formal agreement in place, and there was nothing the new president could do besides complain about it. He wound up resigning his position to spend more time with his family at the beach. We rarely saw him around that summer, and I think he eventually stopped coming altogether, opting to join another club. John made nice with the new president and explained his philosophy of training and keeping staff. The new president agreed, and some of the senior staff wound up coming back with the promise of their original wage. A few weeks ago, I heard from friends and former colleagues that just at the start of the summer season, John passed away in his sleep of natural causes at the ripe age of 91. He was still working, although not as much in the past. It was more of a, hey, I want to keep busy type of thing, than a, I need to keep working kind of thing. Every morning he would take out the lifeguard rowboat and get some exercise in. After all, he was a certified rowing instructor. Rest in peace, John, you were the best. But let me know, was John a jerk? The world needs more people like John in it. He seems like a natural born leader, and he cared about people he worked with. I can relate to John a lot in terms of him trying to get the best for his team, or have mistakes be corrected for the betterment of my coworkers. I've always thought big business or the idea of being fiscally responsible leads to losing the best workers in the end. And it just creates cutting corner situations. So shout out to John and any other people like John in the world that go above and beyond for those around them. Company that we've worked for decades says that we should fire them, so we do. My family runs a small trucking company. Depending on where you are in the world, you might call us P&D company, the final mile company, the white glove company. Basically, we handle the kind of stuff that you might buy to have delivered to your home or business. That's not too big for someone like UPS to deliver, but not big enough for a tractor trailer to haul. And or stuff that actually needs to be brought into the home and set up, like furniture, appliances, etc. A lot of what we've hauled over the years is stuff going to small stores that can take deliveries by large trucks, construction sites where large trucks can't get in and out, neighborhoods and apartment complexes. We don't work for the people buying the stuff, we work for the people selling and shipping it. But as we tend to see the same business owners a lot, we've developed great relationships with them over the years. We don't get rich, but we've been pretty comfortable over the years. One of our major stressors has been a long-time shipper who has, or rather had, become increasingly demanding as time went on. Now, when I say long time, I mean it. We made our first delivery for them over 50 years ago. Our company has been doing business with them longer than any of their current employees or management staff have been there. There was one point not too long ago where the retired guy who came in a few hours a day to sweep our warehouse because he was bored sitting at home literally knew more about shipping systems than their senior field rep who was supposed to be supervising our operations. We have been a small but vital part of their network for so long that almost no one there has realized how much we did for them. We've seen field reps come and go. Some have been great, some have been a little challenging, but most have, once they realized what was going on, largely left us alone to do our jobs. One even called when he took over our area to ask who we were because his predecessor had no notes on us at all because they'd never had to visit. We've just been mostly quietly plugging along, taking care of our customers, and in some cases for generations. Well, this latest rep was genuinely an unpleasant person. He was arrogant, abrasive, casually insulted our employees. Honestly, it's not even worth getting into here. He wasn't someone we wanted to work with. But I'm able to put on a happy face and get along with about anyone when needs must, so onward we went. As I said earlier, the shipper had been getting more and more demanding as time went on. Systems had been getting harder to navigate. Inventory had been getting harder to track. Phone trees had grown into nightmares. More and more layers of bureaucracy had been added, and with every change they'd grown less agile, slower, and more difficult to deal with. One day the field rep called because he didn't like how we'd answered an email. Not that we hadn't answered it, just that he didn't like the manner in which we had answered. After decades of dealing with this shipper, being micromanaged at that level was not something that we were interested in. The manager who was dealing directly with him tried to defuse the situation, but it kept getting worse until the field rep said, "If you aren't happy with how things are going, maybe you should just quit." Oh, okay then. We started running the numbers, looked at all of our other businesses and decided that we could, indeed, go on without them. And then I called the field rep to have a frank conversation with him. And then I wrote a short, polite, direct letter to our customers of over 50 years telling them that we were firing them. We didn't just pull the plug, we gave them a full 60 days notice so they'd have time to get something worked out. And they didn't. We've always been here for them. They've never had to worry about it. They had someone they thought was going to be a replacement, but, well, as of today, most of their customers in the areas haven't had deliveries in weeks, some longer than that. Many don't know when they'll get their next shipment. That field rep might still have a job when it's all said and done, but it's not our problem anymore. Our phone keeps ringing from people that are looking for their freights from the shipper. All we can say is, sorry, you'll have to call them. But let me know, am I the jerk? Always know your worth, people, especially if you run a small business or if you just happen to work for one. Can companies easily replace you? For sure, but it doesn't mean that the transition will be easy. I left my job for a bunch of reasons, but one was definitely because I felt like I wasn't viewed as an asset to the team, but more of just a body. But I heard once I left, the shift wasn't doing well because I was a lead and I had a lot of knowledge that a lot of the new guys didn't have. It caused a lot of headaches and forced the manager that hated me to work a bunch of late nights. Like I said, know your worth. My Karen boss makes my job hell, but I leave her stuck in an elevator. This story harkens back to the ye old days when Blockbuster and Hollywood Video were the things to do on a family-friendly Friday, and cell phones were still something most people didn't really consider necessary, aka the 90s. I took a job at a video store near my house. It was a small family-owned store with 3 different branches in the town. The job was wonderful. I loved movies and games. It was so close to my residence and school. I even got free video rentals and a discount from the sub shop next door. The video store was located in a beautiful old building from the 1920s. It was all marble stairs and a really amazing caged elevator that led up to the storage and employee lounge. It was perfect for me. The hours were flexible, the pay was decent, but one drawback was my supervisor. Let's call her Amanda, because, well, that was her name. Seriously, screw Amanda. Amanda was on the older side and seemed not to be content with how her life turned out. As a result, she took all of her frustration out on everyone she could, especially those people that she worked with who happened to be younger. If you were a young college student like myself, you earned a special little extra helping of disdain from her. I mean, really, how dare you decide to actually have aspirations of making more than $7.50 an hour? While I'm genuinely fairly tolerant of people like Amanda, she really went the extra mile to annoy me as much as humanly possible. She was bitter, mean, petty, and did anything and everything she could to just be plain unpleasant. She wasn't even nice to customers. The only upside to this attitude was that she didn't let Karen customers get away with Karen-ness. I might have been able to take more if she happened to be more particularly knowledgeable or good at her job. She was neither and only appeared to have the job because of good old nepotism. She was the daughter-in-law of the owner. She knew nothing about movies, games, gaming systems, or anything we rented or sold. When the customers had a question, she would pawn them off on another employee. When she had a problem with the computers, who did she call to fix it? Me. When there was a delivery that needed to be checked into the system, who did she call? Me. When stock needed to be dragged up to the stock room, that'd be me again. Any unpleasant task that came up, she would always give it to me. Generally, she hid in the back watching TV or talking on the phone, which did tie up the store's landline for literally hours, or did anything and everything she could to avoid doing an actual job. When I brought Amanda up to Ken, the owner, he simply sighed and gave a pained look and asked me to just try to bear with it and stay out of her way if I could. I got the distinct impression that Ken didn't much care for her either, but she was his daughter-in-law. He did his best to try to make sure I wasn't scheduled to work with her more than at least once a week. One day, I was on the phone with a customer discussing a late fee on their account when Amanda wanted to make a call. This resulted in Amanda ripping me a new one in front of an entire store of people. It was a Saturday and we were packed to the rafters. She was yelling so loudly that the woman on the phone asked if we were being robbed and whether she should call the police. Before I could answer, Amanda yanked the phone out of my hand and slammed it onto the cradle.
You are never ever to be on that phone, you understand me?
When I was desperately aching to headbutt her, I bit my tongue, took a deep breath, and I counted to 10. When that didn't work, I counted to 20, then 50. Instead of telling her that I hoped that she would be ravaged by rabid wolverines, I simply smiled and said, "All right." This seemed to annoy her even more than if I had gotten angry. She stormed back to the office, and I took a stream of customers, all of whom which asked if I was okay, and one offered suggestions on how to dispose of a body. I appreciated the suggestions, but I had plenty of my own ideas. And while eviscerating her with a pair of rusty safety scissors might be a fulfilling immediate solution, it probably wasn't good for my lifetime goals. Unless those goals involved being in a jail cell and becoming overly acquainted by a thick woman with the one eyebrow named Big Betty. Instead, I checked it off in my big book of voodoo curses, and I hoped that I would have the chance to pay Amanda back for her thoughtful gesture of embarrassing me in front of half of the metropolitan area. Still, there were a few pieces to be laid out for my malicious compliance, and Amanda wouldn't disappoint me. The next piece came perhaps a month later. I had been at work for several hours on my 9-hour shift and had only seen Amanda once, and that had been when she had left the store. Considering I only had 2 hours left on my shift and hadn't taken a break, I really needed to go to the bathroom. I told my coworker that I was heading to the restroom. This was, however, apparently not in keeping with Amanda's view for the universe. She actually began to bang and kick the bathroom door, demanding I come out. I took my time, washed my hands, adjusted my hair, and calmly walked out of the bathroom. While she began to scream, I ignored her and walked up to the front of the store and took the cart of movies to be reshelved. She grabbed the front of the cart and swiped the movies off the top. She then informed me of my questionable patronage, told me that I liked to passionately hug mothers, and that I was a female dog. Really, I had no idea of any of these things about myself. I thought all the time that I was just a regular everyday college student. I could have probably gotten on television if I had known all these unique things about myself. Amanda told me that under no uncertain terms was I to ever leave the floor while I was on the clock. Again, I summoned my inner calm that would have made Gandhi proud. I forced a smile and nodded, "All right." I had made up my mind that I would have my chance. No matter how small, I would have my moment. The shining moment came on a lazy and blissfully quiet morning. As it was morning, it would just be me and Amanda. Hopefully, she would stay in the office and I wouldn't have to deal with her at all. When I came in, there was a worker man in the back working on the elevator. One of the guys came up and told me he needed a part and he would be back tomorrow to finish up the work. Annoying, as now I would have to schlep armfuls of heavy tapes up the stairs, but it wasn't the end of the world. The light of my life arrived a few hours later without a word to anyone. I stood at the front putting Be Kind Rewind stickers on a batch of new arrivals when I noticed Amanda through the back door getting into the elevator. After the man told me that he needed a part, it didn't occur to me that the elevator had power on, and I had a moment of amusement at thinking that Amanda was going to have to take the hated stairs. She was, above all, lazy. However, it seemed that the elevator did indeed have power and work. At least it worked just enough to go half a floor up and then stop. It was just close enough to the upper floor that climbing out onto the floor was impossible, but just far enough from the lower floor that climbing out was impossible. I couldn't believe my eyes. My malicious compliance activated. I couldn't entirely see Amanda as she tried to open the door and get out, but I could hear her. The sounds of frustration increased until I heard the most beautiful sound I ever heard. OP! A slow smile reminiscent of the Grinch curved across my lips. I walked to the very edge of the sales floor and called out, "Yes?
The elevator's stuck. Can you open the door from the other side?"
"I don't know, I can't see it from here." Amanda huffed in annoyance.
"Well, get over here and try to open it."
"I can't do that, Amanda."
"Why the—"
enter colorful verbiage here,
"not?"
"I'm not allowed to leave the floor while I'm on the clock under any circumstances."
"Are you—"
enter an even naughtier word here,
"kidding me?"
"You said it yourself. Since I value my job, I cannot possibly go against orders." A stream of curses came from the lock and stuck elevator. I'm pretty sure I'm still not old enough for all the things I heard that day.
"Call maintenance. The number should be in the office."
Trying to sound as innocent and sympathetic as I could possibly manage, while also trying not to burst out laughing. "I can't do that either. I have to leave the floor to go to the office."
"You think you're real?"
Some many naughty words.
"Funny, don't you?"
"I don't know what you mean."
"Call Ken then. I know you know his number."
"Well, I would, but I'm not allowed to use the phone, remember?" Amazingly, there were no curses. There was no screams. There was not even one word telling me that my parents were never married. It was silent. I think for the first time she realized that she might actually be in a little trouble. She was stuck in that position entirely of her own making with no way out for the foreseeable future.
"OP, please. Just get me out of here."
"I'm sorry, Amanda. I'm just following orders." All the pretense of niceness was dropped as she proceeded to inform me of all my unimaginable faults for those of my parents, friends, and any other relations I might have or think to have in the future. Then she sealed her fate. She yelled at me that I was fired. In truth, I really only planned on letting her stew for a few minutes, but after that, nah. "I'm fired? Okay, then I guess I'll just head home." Oh, I should also let you know that Bill called and said that he's in at 7 instead of 5. He has to pick up his brother from the airport, so I guess you'll be in there for a while. I hope you've got a book or something.
"What, you bleepin' bleep? How the bleep do you bleep? Think you can bleepin' do this to me? When I get out of here, I'm going to bleep you in your bleepin' bleep, you bleep bleepin' bleep bleeper."
Wow, okay, yeah, have fun with that. Have a good one. I'm leaving my name tag and shirt on the front desk.
"Wait!"
Don't worry, I'll lock up on my way out and I'll put the sign so people will know we're closed.
"OP, wait, I didn't mean it. Come back."
I walked to the front, wrote a sign that we were closed until 7 p.m. due to unforeseen circumstances. The very last thing I heard from Amanda before I opened the door was,
"But I have to pee."
Still snickering to myself, I locked the door and drove 45 minutes out to Ken's house to let him know the shop was closed. Could I have just gone 5 minutes to my house and called? Sure, I could have. Did I? Nope. Ken seemed a bit surprised to see me there. I thought you were working today." "Oh, I was, but Amanda fired me." "She's not allowed to do that. All hiring and firing goes through me. She knows that." "Don't worry, I'll call her. I think maybe it's time I talk to my son about her. I can't keep her on with her acting like this. I don't think she'll be able to answer the phone." Ken gave me a sharp look as I tried very hard not to smile. Then I gave up entirely and just smiled broadly back at him. "OP? Yes? What did you do?" "Me? I didn't do anything. I only followed orders." Ken then leaned down to meet me eye to eye. "What happened?" I gave him the full tale of her telling me that I couldn't use the phone under any circumstances, to her telling me that I wasn't allowed to leave the sales floor when I was on the clock. Then I told him about her being stuck in the elevator. "You didn't tell her the elevator was broken?" "I didn't even realize it had power." Ken then stood there looking at me gobsmacked and then started laughing. I should really let her out. He paused for a minute and looked down at his dirty hands and clothes, then up at me. but I really shouldn't leave those flowers half planted, and then I should probably take a shower. I don't want to make that drive covered in dirt. Oh, of course not. You've got a really nice car and it would be a lot of work to get that much dirt out of your seats and carpet. Do you need some help with the planting? Ken nodded solemnly back at me and gave me another chuckle. It took probably another hour to finish planting the flowers. Ken told me that I would be paid for the day and sent me home with assurances that I still indeed did have my job and that he would deal with Amanda. I fully enjoyed the rest of my half day off. I did hear from Bill that when he got there, the elevator repair guy had just arrived and that Amanda ended up spending 5 hours stuck in the elevator. After that day, I only ever saw her one more time. She glared daggers at me as I waved happily to her as she carried a bag of her things out to her car. Whenever I think about it, I still get a little smile on my face. Besides, I only did what she told me. But let me know, am I the jerk? This probably goes down as one of the most epic malicious compliance stories I've read here on the Jerk channel. I have so much respect for people that wait for the perfect moment to get back at someone, because it is one thing to get revenge, but it is another thing to have an epic story to go along with it. I find it pretty funny that even the owner of the store didn't care and left the terrible boss stuck in the elevator while he planted flowers. Sometimes karma just tastes the sweetest. Inmates try to act tough, so I cost them his free time. As a preface, I work in the security, law, and enforcement industry. This story takes place in an old county jail during the height of COVID. At the time, I, female, was a correctional officer running my own unit in a majority male populated and employed facility. It took a few months, but I finally earned the respect and trust of most of the inmates. It was drilled into my head that from day one to always be firm, fair, and consistent. And I was. That is how I succeeded running a unit efficiently, though it wasn't without its issues. Namely, inmates jamming their doors with toilet paper or other miscellaneous items. Now, this wasn't your typical or even stereotypical jail. It was old and had huge metal doors. Think big doors with small glass windows, not actual bars. Like most doors, it had the metal mechanism and slot in the center of the door, which was responsible for keeping the door locked and secured. Most everything that had been unlocked was controlled by a big old clunky control board. Only a select few units had computerized systems. My job was mainly the control officer, which consisted of operating the control board, answering the phones, key holders, filing daily paperwork, etc. Said control board had a variety of buttons, but was mostly used to let inmates/COs in and out, turning on TVs and turning on the mezzanine lights on and off at each unit. It should also be noted that as control officer, you almost never have direct contact with inmates, as you are higher up in a fishbowl or bubble, as we call it. We control officers had to find unique ways to interact and converse with the inmates. All of this will be important later. Now on to the story. On this rare day, I was assigned to block officer. Same unit, except now I am patrolling the blocks and spending the majority of my shift having direct supervision over the inmates. I was always one to make my presence known, patrolling every 20 to 30 minutes, even when there's no rec and inmates were locked in, sitting on the block during recreational hours, random cell phone inspections, the works. On this particular morning, I was conducting my first tour of B block, and I asked the control officer to inform me of the doors that were not secure. My coworker notified me that B108 was not secure, and I promptly made my way over there. You see, there were colored lights under each door, red or green, indicating whether a door was secure or not. The inmates were expected to keep their doors secured during non-rec hours. However, there were quite a few inmates that were consistently jamming their doors, thus being able to escape their cell and do whatever they want. These things range from taking unauthorized showers to running into another inmate's cell and shanking them. You see why this could be a problem, and it created a huge safety/security risk. The inmates in B108 gave me an issue with this at least once a week. Even when previously housed in C block, they resorted to putting globs of toothpaste in the slot to manipulate the door open. I had had enough. I made them clean it out, and as a punishment, they wouldn't be receiving rec during my shift and would be getting a 3-day lock-in. Simply put, that meant no phone calls, showers, TV/tablets, or yard time during first shift, and only coming out for scheduled appointments. It may sound a bit harsh, but they always get rec time at some point in the day, and this was one of the few tactics that worked for me. To say that they were livid would be an understatement. The one inmate, who we will call Potty Mouth, PM, was fuming and spouting slurs and insults even after I left the block. I didn't care. I warned them not to jam their door on numerous occasions. 3 days go by and they finally are allowed to resume recreational activities. I am assigned the block again and delivered hall passes. These are used for inmates to get around the jail for upcoming video calls. At this time, in-person visits were not allowed due to COVID, and inmates were doing video calls in the visitation room instead. It so happened that one of these inmates, PM, in B108 had a video scheduled for that day. All visits are made with the knowledge and consent of the inmate days prior. Dates and times, 30 minutes, are precise due to a limited amount of monitors in the visitation room, and there being over 1,000 inmates in the facility. Once your time is up, your time is up. If there is a connection issue or the person doesn't show up, it cannot be pushed back to later in the day. You must reschedule for the upcoming weeks. It's early in the morning, approximately 8:15, and I knock at the door to get the inmate's attention. PM wakes up and immediately starts in on me. "What, you B?" I inform him of his visit and slide him his hall pass under the door. Like your standard hall pass, it has a time, date, or time of the appointment. Inmate name, unit, blah blah blah. He snatches it up and orders me not to freaking say anything to him. I walk away not wanting to start anything first thing in the morning. Visits start promptly at noon that day, and the inmates begin preparing themselves to see their loved ones, taking showers, getting dressed, and so on. It's not my job, but I always went out of my way to remind inmates that their appointments was soon, and I would let them leave 15 to 20 minutes early so they could walk across the jail and make it there on time. You wouldn't believe how many would play poker or watch TV and would actually get mad at me for interrupting them, trying to remind them that they had an appointment. Then, 5 minutes before their visit, rush to take a shower, run out, and then come back upset that they somehow missed their appointment. I was in the bubble covering for the control officer while they took their lunch, when I noticed PM sitting on the table undressed, sweats and a t-shirt, talking to another group of inmates with his back turned to me. I looked at the time and realized it was only about an hour before his video call was scheduled to begin. I then began to flash the mezzanine lights to get his attention. It took at least 2 to 3 times of me doing this before the other inmates told him to turn around. Assumes I want him off the table, policy violation, and flags me off before turning back towards his friends. Cue malicious compliance. You want me not to say anything to you? You want to ignore me when I'm trying to help you, even after getting cussed out? Fine. I sat and watched every single inmate in B block get up, shower, and get dressed. They were ready to go at least 30 minutes before their visit, all lined up near the door, anxiously waiting for me to let them out. Everybody but PM. No, he wasn't outside playing basketball or on the phone and just let the time get away from him. No, he wasn't taking a nap. He was just sitting 10 feet away from everyone who was waiting, running his mouth. 20 minutes before his visit starts, I begin letting the inmates into the hallway. I stop one of the nicer inmates and ask, "Why isn't PM with you guys?" He's confused. I say, "Yeah, I gave him his pass this morning and tried to flash the lights at him." He runs back in to remind PM of his impending video call. PM shoots daggers at me and frantically runs into his cell to get dressed. I smile to myself. Unsurprisingly, he missed his visit. He came back screaming at me for making him late for his video call. I didn't care. I just laughed and said it wasn't my job. The best part is, there was a huge clock hanging directly above his head, so there was no excuse. But let me know, am I the jerk? Good on this OP here for sticking it to the rude inmate. I know a lot of people don't have sympathy for inmates, but I've seen plenty of people change their lives in prison. So I'm always for respecting people that want a second chance. But if you are going to be a jerk even after you've messed up, you deserve the karma that goes your way. Entitled Boss tries to get me fired over a dirty joke, regrets it when I bring up her little friend. About 15 years ago, I moved across a few states to where my wife was starting her new position as a professor at a local university. We had the first 3 of our 4 children, and while I was going to mainly stay at home to care for them, I wanted at least a part-time job for extra cash and whatnot. So I took a full-time position as a cook at a retirement home/care facility in the town we moved to. I have a culinary degree and years of experience working in small kitchens, hotels, and a previous university kitchen. This was a very small kitchen and had a lot of hand-me-down practices that have managed to avoid professionalism and efficiency. Basically, whoever ran the kitchen just did whatever they felt like doing if they thought it made sense. The current head of dietary who actually hired me had a few years of experience. but she was retiring and her position was being taken by a kitchen staff member who was brought into the kitchen from being a housekeeper. She had very little training and no certifications, but was taking the courses as she had started the position on the facility's dime. At first, it was very friendly and casual. We all got along fair enough. It was my new supervisor, boss, me, the main cook, Queen, who had plenty of experience in small-town kitchens, and an ex-truck driver, King, who had no experience, but could follow directions and sort of assemble the meals as directed. Our facility director, Big Boss, ran the entire place in all departments. I had a habit of maintaining a professional demeanor whenever I worked, until I could test the atmosphere and relax into whatever environment turned out to be. I learned from this incident not to do that and will always maintain a professional face at work, no matter how relaxed it is because of this incident. After some months in the position, all was mostly fine, but boss had some issues with the way I performed my task. I used pretty standard practices for preparing, cooking, and expediting meals that she was unfamiliar with. An example would be prepping meals components during downtime as residents of the facility would come in to be fed. She was used to just standing at the window waiting for nurses to come up and give the name of the resident. Then as the aides cleaned up, she rushed to prepare the lunch. I would come up to the window when a nurse approached, but otherwise be prepping food to go into the oven/stovetops for the impending lunch hour, or prepping food for the next day's meals. This not only managed time better, but allowed me to avoid many snafus and possibly prep something extra for the independent residents who would request something at the last minute for lunch when they came for a morning meal. They had a tendency to just trickle in, and there weren't more than maybe 40 residents in total. One event would be the morning that she came in early to do some paperwork and saw me prepping 4 full pans of pork chops to put into the cooler until oven time. She was terribly confused. What are you doing? Pork chops for lunch. But it's breakfast time. Yes, breakfast is ready in the steam table. But you're supposed to be serving breakfast. I am. As they get here, I get their breakfast. I've already prepped the veggies and the potatoes. After I get these pans into the cooler, I can start the cake for tomorrow's dessert. But it's breakfast. And so on. This was the start of her trying to change my methods to hers, but almost every time she tried, I'd resist. At first, she pulled the I'm in charge thing, but not often because I had more experience than her and I could explain how my method was standard practice or made more sense than hers. She never had a reasonable explanation that what I was doing shouldn't be done other than I don't like it. Really, she had some ridiculous ideas about how to cook. A few times she would involve the facility head, Big Boss, and I'd get to work to be told that I needed to go talk to her. Every single time I managed to defend what I was doing and get an agreement from Big Boss that what I was doing was professional and acceptable. More than a handful of times, I demonstrated how things boss expected of me not only weren't efficient, but sometimes skirted or even violated serve safe and food handling safety. A big one was she would be angry that she now had to bend over to lift out meat out of the boxes on the bottom shelf, instead of the second shelf where she had them previously. Above the shelf were the boxes of lettuce and other raw veggies. Usually I would be told to continue what I was doing and Big Boss would talk to Boss, who would stare daggers at me for the rest of the shift. This went on for months until Boss thought she could finally get rid of me through some shenanigans. One day I was called into Boss's office towards the end of my shift and she said that we needed to go talk to Big Boss. We go together and Big Boss tells me that Boss has brought to my attention my unprofessional behavior in the kitchen. Boss then clarifies by relating a little off-color gag I had taken part in one day with Queen. We had been putting away our deliveries, and each of us had one of those 80-20 meat tubes. And on a whim, we both started hanging them in front of our aprons and swinging them from side to side, chasing King around in front of the coolers with our meaty meat sticks. Yes, it was unprofessional. Yes, it was juvenile. Yes, it was kinda gross, but this wasn't an isolated incident of tomfoolery. And it was the same sort of play that Boss herself had taken part in. Boss thought she had finally gotten me as Big Boss asked if this had actually happened and I said it had. Boss starts to explain she can't have that kind of behavior in the kitchen and it was unprofessional. She loved being able to say that directed at me considering how I've shown how unprofessional she was previously and that it was offensive and dirty and blah blah blah. When she was done and Big Boss looked at me for my response, I apologized and agreed that it was inappropriate, and I should have known better, but I also explained that I never made an off-color joke, began an off-color discussion, or took part in any behavior considered unprofessional until I had seen that it was commonplace in the kitchen. I waited to gauge the environment first until I saw how they conducted themselves in their kitchen. After I saw what they considered acceptable, I took part. I also explained that it was actually Boss who first made me aware that they regularly engaged in this off-color topics and behavior. And only after she wandered into that territory did I feel comfortable enough to go there myself. I then apologized and said that it wouldn't happen again, but that everyone, including Boss, should be held to the same expectation. Boss immediately snapped, "What did I do that made you think it was okay to be so offensive?" Which was a huge mistake on her part. "Boss, who is Henry?" At this point, she clammed up. Her eyes grew wide as she turned so red it was kind of scary. Big Boss looks at Boss in confusion, and Boss just looks back and forth between us in panic. I begin to explain that Henry is Boss's vibrating toy. I know this because on my second day in the kitchen, the dishwashing machine was, like it was quite often, being repaired because it had broken down again. The repairman was this guy that Boss and Queen kept staring at and giggling about. Queen jokes that she thinks Boss is sabotaging the machine so that this guy will have to come repair it again. At one point, he goes out to his truck and Queen tells Boss she should just go for it, asking him out or whatever. And Boss declines, smiling and giggling. "Looks like I'll have a date with Henry tonight." Queen chuckles and I ask who Henry is. Queen tells me it's Boss's special friend, and Boss finishes by explaining he's big and red and has multiple vibration settings. He even wiggles too. I laughed and she continued saying something like, "A girl's gotta do what a girl's gotta do, even if she has to keep buying batteries." I go on to explain that Queen can confirm this and that there are probably other instances where others were present where Boss was engaging in similar discussions or taking part in similar joking around. Big Boss is looking at Boss for a rebuttal, but Boss is still standing there shuffling her feet, sweating bullets. Big Boss thanks me for being frank and that from this point moving forward, none of this behavior is acceptable from anyone, and excuses me to finish my shift as Boss stays behind to presumably get reamed. There were a few instances of us butting heads along the same lines as before, but she didn't talk to me much after. I ended up moving on a couple of months after this, but let me know. Am I the jerk? Oh man, do I have so many stories like this one the OP just talked about here. I used to work in an automotive factory surrounded by nothing but men. You could only assume the type of shenanigans that happened. But I will always say that getting instant karma on a supervisor is always the best feeling. I actually worked with an engineer aide that had a lot of pull in the company because he was a good worker, but he was also very vulgar on the floor around non-supervisor type people. We often went back and forth about life and how we viewed things. He was one of those work is work types, and you should do your job no matter what. I am of the mind that if you get paid to do a certain job, and your job constantly expects you to do more than your coworkers, you should be compensated for it. Well, one day during a safety meeting, the safety guy had taken a bunch of pictures of no-nos around the campus, and wanted us to call them out. Well, one of these photos just so happened to have my backpack on the top of a console, and it was called out by this engineering aide. Everyone knew it was my bag, and of course I just had a bunch of eyes on me during the meeting. Well, moments later, I got my chance to strike back because during the discussion of cleanup procedures, I mentioned who is responsible for cleanup when an engine is taken in and out of the stand. Because there's this one particular stand that is always messy and has leaks, but it never seems to be cleaned up. This stand just so happened to be one of this engineer aide's stands. The safety guy says that is the job of the people that remove and install the engine. And everyone in the room just starts giggling like school children after this was said because they knew I had just got this guy back for calling me out. I hated that job and I won't go back, but I won't lie, sometimes it had its moments. Entitled Boss demands that I do what she says, so I end up destroying the whole business in the process. A little backstory. I used to run a medium-ish sized 40-room hotel down in Florida for a couple of years not that long ago. The hotel was a couple of old neighboring beach apartment motels bought by a foreign investor and then extensively renovated into a single modern boutique hotel. The location was amazing for this type of business. Before the pandemic, it was indeed a prime piece of property. The property manager that ran it at the time built the hotel up with the idea of a place people would really be happy to return to, especially considering that the person who had run the place at first, an ex-girlfriend of the owner, had chased all the old motel guests off. Apparently, and I quote one of the former guests here, "We don't want your kind here." She told people, meaning old generational, mainly middle-class Americans from the Midwest, spending their family vacations down in Florida every year for decades. Also backtracking a bit to a point that's rather important for the story, the owner is not a nice person, nor had he ever worked in or run a hospitality business. His main line of business is retail, abroad. And he is a self-absorbed, entitled narcissist with an attitude. He had constantly meddled, making incredibly foolish and downright harmful decisions during the renovations, and then forcing the property manager to carry them out. She was smart and competent enough to usually find a hard workaround, but sometimes he insisted further. Things weren't smooth. So fast forward to me starting to run the actual hotel part of the business, which at first the owner wouldn't meddle in as much. Our main focus group at the time had been the cruise ship crowd, regular vacation goers, the conference nearby, and finally, the annual events. Multiple music festivals, holidays, as well as, drumroll, the International Boat Show. The last one being a week-long affair of yacht-building companies selling their boats to the rich folks. 10-minute walk from our hotel. The place I managed was a bit too low-key for the rich crowd, but guess where all those yacht-building companies wanted a room to place all their stuff at? Well, we had 40 of them with multiple beds and full kitchens. And we built the place up with regular guests in mind, including the festival goers and the yachtsmen, especially the yachtsmen, meaning discounts, free upgrades, personalized approach, regular touch-ups, and even occasional BBQ parties. I was on a first-name basis with quite a few boat building managers, as well as boat captains, because when a boat is sold, they often stay around, get repaired, and the crew has to stay somewhere, and our little place was known in the circles as a good place for them. I had made it my goal to make it attractive for the target audience. I'm a firm believer in the hospitality business being run with clients in mind, not the profit. So we had an amazing year of building up connections and making the place really nice to a few very specific circles. And then the pandemic hit. The hotel was almost empty for half a year. Had to furlough most of our staff for a while. Eventually the pandemic was sort of forgotten about, at least in Florida. Cruise ships hadn't come back, but the regular vacation goers had. In mass, so we got very busy very fast. However, the owner wasn't thrilled with me hiring a new front desk receptionist. Why bother if I myself could do the job as well, right? Make housekeepers, we had 2 of them total for the entire place, do laundry as well. Get the property manager to do accounting too. At the time, the owner had bought a yacht, just because, and attempted to make our property manager run the boat as well. So after a few months of struggle, she had finally had enough and had quit. Good for her, we are still friends even today. The owner replaced the property manager with his daughter. Like father, like daughter, exactly the same type. However, in their country, manager is manager. They don't get the difference between a property manager, does the building or the property side of things, and a business manager, does the business in that building. She immediately had decided that her job was to run the hotel, and my job was to do what I'm told. And the first thing they do, the father and the daughter, is look at the boat show that is just 1 month ahead, as well as the festival season a couple of months later. They had a brilliant idea of making more money. After all, why had we sold all the rooms that cheap? Triple rates for the boat show? We could easily make twice as much, right? And why offer free parking when no one around does that? Not like it's a selling point, right? So they tell me to make changes to the room rates on existing reservations and to start charging for the parking on reservations that were made with the free parking listed. And above all, charge more for the boat show. On the rooms that had been sold a year ago, mostly face to face when people were checking out after the last show. And it was apparently up to me to call them and let them know that they had raised their rates by 50%. Oh, and that the parking for the show is now $100 per vehicle. I was not happy with the idea, to say the least. For whatever reason, I had assumed that this is not how things are done in the US, even down in Florida, despite the infamous Florida man. Nor I felt comfortable calling people, most of whom I knew, to tell them this banger of an idea. So I had fought against this decision as hard as I could. I came up with various reasons as to why we should not do it, point out how we run the place, and argued the point of reputation. The owner hadn't listened and said, "I hear you, but trust my business acumen. After all, I have millions." The daughter had listened to me very carefully. Her reply? "Your direct supervisor has decided and given your instructions. It is not your place to think and question things. Just call them all and explain everything. That's your job." Cue my malicious compliance then. I called our guests, and not just the boat people. I called most regulars of ours. Took a while, and I explained what was happening. I told them the truth, how things are run now, what new ideas are there, etc. I also told them that I was very much against this new decision, and that I probably won't be here for much longer. Most of them thanked me for the information and said that they will be in touch. A few local yachtsmen asked if they could come in to discuss things. In the end, the boat people were forced to pay extra. It's impossible to find good property at any price range, close to the boat show location just a month before the show itself. The local ones who came in and met with the owner and his daughter got a great deal of free parking after the price adjustment. I struggled to keep my professional face. However, when I met with them on my own after their talk with the owner, and when I talked with the other regulars over the phone, almost all of them thanked me for my efforts and told me that they will not be back. Neither would anyone they know. Also, if I go to a new place, would I please let them know so they could go there too? Well, that very week I gave the owner's daughter my notice, left just before the show began, letting her be the one dealing with the crap storm, since she insisted on being the boss so much. From what I hear, she hadn't managed at all. Right now, the place is run by some shady management company that just doesn't care, with the daughter supposedly running the front desk. No one is answering any calls or checking emails. Reviews plummeted. They hadn't even renewed their licenses or paid Booking.com or Expedia fees, who are now threatening legal action. And apparently, the owner and his daughter blame me and the property manager for everything, since it was our leaving that screwed them over. But let me know. Am I the jerk? Never trust nepotism hires. They are by far some of the worst people to work with because 9 out of 10 times they come in with a sense of entitlement. I used to work with a bunch of people that had family in the company, and a majority of the time they just outright sucked as coworkers. So it's hard to trust someone who has been given a position that others have had to work for. This OP story is a perfect example of why you should always be worried of working for a place that puts family in positions of power and puts profits over customers. I think I found someone who's a better match for me than my boyfriend. I'm writing this on a throwaway for obvious reasons. I love my boyfriend. We've only been dating recently. He's your tough and wise guy who doesn't always get mushy with his feelings. I think that's my problem. He's not very often verbally expressive with his love for me. He doesn't always reassure me verbally. We're doing the long distance thing right now, so options are limited. Just basically, he's not verbally expressive in many ways, but my love language is words of affirmation and I need it from him. I do think that he's just different from me, but expresses he cares in other ways. He's away for a while doing military work, but he'll be back soon. I'm definitely talking to him about this because I still want to be with him and I think we can fix it. There's a lot of compromise here and there, but I think we can make it work. So just a few months ago, I met this guy who I'm now very good friends with, and he's the sweetest and most thoughtful guy I've ever met. I've always seen these types of guys in other relationships, but now I know they actually exist. He never misses to check up on me, he does everything to cheer me up, and he cares for me a lot, and he's so selfless. He always wishes me well in advance, and he's basically the opposite of everything my boyfriend is. For dog comparisons, he's like a golden retriever, where my boyfriend is like a pit bull. I know pit bulls can be sweet, but you get it. He literally does the most for me and even tells me that I'm prettier than every girl. If I didn't know any better, I would think that he likes me, which is a possibility, but I don't think so because he says he doesn't like anyone at the moment. Yes, he knows that I'm in a relationship, yet he tells me all of these things still. I think that's how I know that he's just being super friendly to me, and that's just his nature. He's actually a blob of wholesomeness and care. We also share more of the same ideas. I could suggest anything and he'd be willing to do it with me or for me, but my boyfriend declines some ideas I suggest. There are also minor things that make me sort of doubt my boyfriend's intentions with me sometimes. So I'm scared. I'm scared that I might have accidentally met a better match for me while I'm still in a relationship. He makes me feel like I could be loved the way I love. Sometimes I don't want to get along with him so much because of this reason. Because what about my boyfriend? I love him so much, but I don't want to leave him, but the presence of this person makes me think that there's a better, more accurate match for me out there, which could be him. Kind of like a don't settle for less type of thing. I don't like him at the moment and I don't want to. I feel terrible because I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to find someone better. If my boyfriend and I can talk about this and things can get better, obviously I'm staying with him. It just boggles my mind that there's someone else that's more of an ideal person like the one in my head. Small what ifs like what if my boyfriend isn't my person because I might fit better with someone else. This is something that's been bothering me for days. It feels good to type this down and see it as readable paragraphs. I've always been honest with myself, but these might be harsh truths that I'm scared to face after all. But let me know, am I the jerk? I don't think the OP is a bad person here. I feel like these are just human emotions. As long as she doesn't act on these feelings, she should be fine. But I know when I was in a relationship, I met plenty of women that I thought would be a better fit for me in the long run, and with the way the relationship played out, it might have been a smart move to give some of them a chance. But that's in hindsight. But as for this perfect guy, it is possible that he does have a thing for the OP, but I can also say that I used to have a friend that I did similar things for. I mean, I didn't go around saying that she was the most beautiful girl out of them all, because I feel that's a bit much when you're not with someone. But I did treat her like a ride or die, so it is possible, no matter what some people might say, for men and women to just be friends. My entitled teacher insults my cousin, so I destroy his career in front of my classmates. Bear with me, there's a lot of backstory here. This is over a decade ago, so some details are foggy. I went to a small rural high school where they had the smartest kids get sent to a different building their junior and senior year to take college courses. My junior year, the woman in charge of us in a distant learning center had been teaching at our school district for 15 plus years. She knew us, our families, taught in multiple grades, and coached about 3/4 of us in track and tennis. Keep in mind, our entire student body, K through 12, wouldn't have broken 500 kids if we even padded the numbers with voluntary pre-K and GED students. She knew us, our antics, and generally trusted us to get our work done. She made sure she actually watched our class and didn't get into a bind on our assignments outside of that. As long as we were doing something productive and had our main stuff done, our time was ours and to use it as we see fit. In my case, it was mostly spent playing guitar and reading up on playbooks for whatever athletic competition I had that week. I was an academically good but insufferably lazy student. Summer passes, first day of senior year comes around. The teacher we all adored had moved away, her husband had got a job elsewhere that paid big money. In her place was some tall red-headed jerk none of us had ever seen before. Turns out he was the new head coach for girls basketball and our new distant learning supervisor. Our college courses didn't start for a couple of weeks, so he spent the entire first day pontificating on how lucky we were all to have him since he had spent the last 10 years at the university world and knew how it worked and how he would make sure that we weren't just slacking off because we were seniors. The fact that he went from university to high school should have been red flags to people that hired him. Whatever. A couple weeks go by and this coach, we'll call him Bob, makes us do pointless practice assignments like writing a paper on respect in APA format or researching new cars for his wife while citing our resources, all under the guise of making sure we are prepared. The students all politely informed him that these courses were all through a community college and were genuinely no more difficult than an AP high school class, except for the STEM courses. Fast forward 2 weeks and courses start. Finally, we thought. Bob's antics throughout the year would have been bearable had he not made a habit of insulting students who did something that wasn't to his liking, or held a political view contrary to the university's culture he came from, which was all of us. He went to demanding that we submit all assignments to him before our actual professors, which he then did not go through quickly, causing a great many of us to lose points for late assignments. We started ignoring this and sending him a copy at the same time we submitted the assignment. He would also also tell us that we were in no way mature enough for this kind of learning. We all had to maintain the institution GPA of a 3.0 or better to stay in the program. We all averaged about a 3.8. And if it was up to him, he'd take our entitled butts back over to the main building for real classes. The straw that broke the camel's back came at the end of the fall semester. We'd all taken our finals, passed, and we were looking forward to a few easy weeks. Bob came in that morning in a worse mood than usual. I found out years later that this was the day his divorce proceedings began, and he started berating one of the girls for how she was dressed. She ignored him, as did the rest of us. We were all just trying to make it through to the end of the semester. Bob then began one of his speeches about how terrible and entitled we all were. No one was paying attention, which made him even more angry, but he knew he couldn't really punish us for anything. So he zeroed in on this one kid who had been placed in the classroom for remedial learning as it was quiet and a consistent environment. He was the one student in the room actually working on something. The convo below is paraphrased as it was 10 years ago. "So student, what are you doing?" Somewhat rudely, "I'm trying to study for my test coming up so I don't get held back." "For what? So you can eventually go flip burgers at the Dairy Queen?" This student makes a 6-figure income as a welder now. "Please, you're not going to get it done anyways, so have some respect and pay attention when an adult is speaking." That's when I had enough. That student just so happened to be my cousin. I was intimately familiar with his academics and personal struggles, and knew how hard he was working to straighten up. Our family is a rather well-known and affluent one in our community, and student was cruelly regarded as a screw-up by some folks outside of our family, despite his overwhelmingly kind disposition. Now this move-in crapstick was insulting one of the most valuable members of the class and my family. It was time to hurt this guy in the worst way I could think of without hurting myself too badly or getting arrested. You see, my mother had been teaching for 25 years in the district at that point, and my stepfather is a retired guidance counselor, so I knew the rules. I'd previously refrained from honestly discussing his conduct with my parents because Bob's daughter had actually become part of our friend circle, and I knew how hard life would be on her if her dad lost his job, as his reputation made her life hard enough. The college course kids also did theater and athletics together, so she was a part of our life. Again, it was a tiny school. Half of the varsity offensive line was part of the district-winning production of Flowers of Algernon, and our star running back was also a regional qualifier in robotics. But she was graduating with the rest of us and going to school out of state, so collateral damage would be minimal. Knowing what would happen next, I casually remarked, "Coach Bob, it seems to me that if you knew half as much about basketball as you think you know about student, you'd probably still have your job at the university. Or you would have gotten your contract renewed for another year at the last school board meeting. Where will you go after this school year ends?" The room went dead quiet. That info wasn't in the newspaper yet. Bob's face turned an absolute vibrant shade of red. His voice shaking, he tells me, "Outside, now." I calmly set down my books and stepped into the foyer of the building. Bob followed me out, closed the door, and proceeded to scream every insult and cuss word he could think of in my face for at least 4 straight minutes. I was the most smug, lazy, entitled little brat he had ever seen, apparently. I may have been able to pull the wool over the eyes of my pastor, every other teacher, his daughter, and all my coaches, who were constantly irritated with me being so lazy. But god damn it, I couldn't fool him. I was never going anywhere in life, and I was going to ride my family's name like a parasite. To be honest, his lung capacity was pretty impressive. I don't think he took a single breath for the entirety of his rant. Once he stopped to catch his breath, I asked, "Coach Bob, may I go back to reading now?" Bob screamed, "No, your butt is going straight to Principal Munch, and I will write down exactly what you said and you will sign the damn thing. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir, I'd be happy to sign it." Bob gave me a questioning gaze. "Actually, I'd be happy to go down to Principal Munch. I need to ask him for a letter of recommendation for a scholarship, and of course, he will ask me what led me to saying something so disrespectful. Of course, I can't lie to him, and then I'll have to mention our little chat here." By this point, the teacher in the other classroom, who I also happened to be related to, came outside to see what the commotion was, and heard at least the tail end of his glorious speech. She was about to say something, but I turned and gave her a smile and wink. I had this in the bag. 18-year-old me was riding high. Bob sent me back into the distant learning room and followed me in. I stood by the door, awaiting my office referral. A minute went by and it never came. "Sit down, Jones." "Coach Bob, I believe classroom insubordination requires an office referral."
if that's the way you want to go.
Bob's voice started to raise, but at this point he understood the situation. He wrote up the office referral and I walked happily down to the admin office. The principal was surprised to see me, even more surprised that I was sent on a disciplinary action. I told him what happened and I got detention for 1 day as punishment for open disrespect of a teacher, which I kinda deserved, and I got a thank you for my honesty. The next 2 weeks were heavenly. Bob barely spoke a word and spent most of his time glaring at me or looking for job listings. At the start of the spring semester, he wasn't in distant learning. In fact, he was nowhere to be seen. Turned out he had accepted a last-minute opportunity somewhere else before the Christmas break and had to move there in time for the spring practices to start. What a coincidence. I found out years later that Bob was soon let go from his next coaching job, and he had gotten divorced. Other faculty had apparently repeatedly complained about his conduct, and he was on incredibly thin ice long before my little stunt. Honestly, I feel kinda sorry for the guy after I'm writing this memory down, but let me know. Am I the jerk? Man, I hated teachers like this. I've had my fair share of bad teachers, especially when I was younger and they thought I was a troublemaker. Turns out I just had dyslexia and was having trouble learning at the same pace as my classmates. But I actually had a substitute teacher that was very similar to Coach Bob. He was actually this black gentleman who always wore doctor's hairnets on his shoes for some reason. To this day, I still don't understand why. Well, one day while he was subbing for my math teacher, he asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told him that I wanted to make films and he straight up laughed in my face and said, "That's not gonna happen." And he also mentioned that his brother tried to do this and failed. But to this day, I still think it's one of the worst things a teacher can do is to tell a student that they won't amount to anything. But if I ever win an Oscar, you can bet my speech will include something about this substitute teacher. But to be honest, I don't even know if he's still alive. You don't want me to leave until this bathroom is spotless? You got it, boss. During my time working at a grocery store, I went through multiple managers. Some were good and I got along with them, and others not so much. The manager of this story wasn't the worst I've had, but I can definitely say that she was the most annoying to deal with. She was one of those types that went, "I don't know your duties all that well, but I'm micromanaging you and you have to do things my way." And got angry if we didn't do things her way, even if her way wasn't the most efficient. Around the time she started as a manager, a new store policy was being implemented about cleaning the small public bathroom in the back of the store every 2 hours. Honestly, I was not against that, as the public bathroom was only a single toilet and sink. A quick mop and spray wouldn't take too long anyway, and cleanliness was made all that more important when COVID first started. Unfortunately, my manager's micromanaging came into play even here. Basically, if the place wasn't clean enough to eat off of, it wasn't clean according to her. Yes, somehow she expected that level of cleanliness every 2 hours whilst all of us are busy with our own work. It didn't help that occasionally there were doodles and other such things on the walls that were hard to get off, if not impossible, with just the normal cleaning supplies. I even remember that one time some guy used spray paint to do some graffiti in there. Anyways, one day it's my turn to clean the bathroom. At the time, it was considerably busy due to the lack of cashiers that day. As I was often used as a backup cashier at that point, I didn't have time to do such a deep clean like my manager wanted at the first 2 hour mark. A bit later, my manager apparently must have saw the bathroom herself and decided to pull me away to berate me. The following is an abridged version of what she said. "Why didn't you clean the bathroom? You were supposed to do it earlier." I did, but I didn't have time to deep clean everything. I had to help some customers at the cash register. There are some things that I can't clean in there anyways. "No excuses. You're not full on cashier anyways. Go back and clean again. And do it right this time. I want it to be spotless. Don't leave until you're done." "Aye, aye, ma'am." And now it's finally time for the malicious compliance. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes there were things on the walls that just would not come off with regular cleaning materials we had on hand. Hence why we usually had a cleaning company do such deep cleans at night. This naturally resulted in not being able to leave as I had no way to clean these things myself. So I just did my best to clean what I could, and then I just sat on the toilet doing stuff on my phone. I had nothing else to do after all, and nowhere to go. Of course, I wasn't mean-spirited enough to make customers' bladders suffer for my compliance, so I did exit the bathroom when somebody needed to use it, but I went back in afterwards. All in all, I didn't do much for the next 5 hours or so. I got paid for sitting around on my phone and occasionally cleaning. Hooray for having a charger on hand. The fallout outside the bathroom, however, was much more eventful. Turns out that a bit after I was sentenced to being in the bathroom jail cell, one of the cashiers ended up clocking out for the day and another cashier had called out sick. That just left one cashier, technically two, but one has to run the self-checkout, and my manager to deal with the horde of customers waiting to check out during one of the busiest days of the week. As I expected, I was called over the loudspeaker multiple times to come help from that manager of all people. But I'm like, you ordered me to stay in here, so I'm staying in here, and I didn't respond to those calls. It didn't help that I knew she would call because she didn't want to do cashier work. Eventually, that other cashier also ended up having to clock out for the day. So normally, me and the other one who called out sick would be at the cash registers. My manager had to do this mostly by herself. Unfortunately, I couldn't see this in real time as I was in the back, but I do hope that she had to suffer a bit from angry, rude, and or entitled customers. I ended up leaving my prison a bit after 8 p.m., which was after she had left for the night. I hadn't had my lunch break after all, and I actually felt like helping after she was gone. During my next shift with her in charge, I got pulled into the office by her and sat down with another manager. I suppose as a witness or something. Once again, the below is an abridged version. Where were you that day? You didn't respond to any of my calls and nobody could find you. You must have left the store. I was simply following orders. Your orders, I might add.
What are you talking about?
You told me that I couldn't leave the bathroom until I made sure it was spotless.
Well, it shouldn't have taken you that long.
I did tell you that there was stuff I couldn't clean with the supplies on hand, but you insisted. You even said you would fire me if I didn't do it. Okay, that last part was a lie, but I made it up to get the other manager in the room on my side. But it also had the unintended effect of getting the manager to nearly lunge at me, and she started full on yelling at my face. Despite willingly taking part in trying to piss her off with my malicious compliance, I still had some anxiety issues, and they kicked in during this time. That was enough for the other manager to step in and stop this. In the end, I was just told that I could go back to my normal duties, and I didn't have to keep the bathroom that clean. Unfortunately, my micromanaging manager didn't seem to get much more than a slap on the wrist. To be fair, it made sense as she didn't do much else besides yell at me, and there was no physical altercation. But even then, I managed to have some fun before I left that job. For unrelated reasons, by simply watching her frustrated face knowing that she couldn't micromanage me as much anymore. But let me know, am I the jerk? You gotta love petty malicious compliance acts every once in a while, especially if you know nothing's going to happen to the manager. At one of my old jobs, I used to have to work with the bakery manager once or twice a week during closing, and he was really the only manager that preached the one team method. For those of you that don't know this, it is a term used in retail, and for my particular workplace, this meant that no one goes home until the whole store was done. Meaning if I worked in electronics and I finished my area, I had to jump over to clothing to help them finish their stuff. Now I didn't have a problem with this whole thing because I had friends in other departments that I wanted to help or chat with anyways. But my issue with one team came about when the bakery department got to leave right at closing. You know, the department that was run by the manager making us stay late. What made it worse was that we would sometimes help out bakery when they were swamped, but they would never return the favor. Again, I didn't really care because the bakery ladies were cool, but the whole situation was stupid when the manager preached no one leaves until the store is done. So I fought him on this many times. We even got in each other's faces at one point. I've never been scared to speak my mind when it comes to the workplace. But I wasn't the only person that was annoyed by this whole thing. So what we ended up doing on the nights that we worked with him was started yelling one team every time we saw him. He wouldn't say anything, but you could tell that he was annoyed. The one team thing didn't last much longer after that if I recall correctly. I'd like to think that it was because of us, but more than likely it was because we were just costing the company money by staying later than we needed to. I manipulated a customer into feeling bad for me after she was rude to me. The title sounds worse than it actually is, but still, it was my first day at work. I was working at a large chain restaurant in the pre-order area. I had the misfortune of having the first day be on Saturday, in the middle of a huge sale. Normally, customers have to wait in line to get their code scanned so the workers can go to the back and get their order out. And if a customer wants to add additional food to their order, they don't have to wait in line again. A bunch of people were coming up to me and I was getting really stressed out. This one older lady came and asked if she could add more food to her order. I told her that she would have to wait in line. as she hadn't given her code for that order yet. Another lady who had been helping me asked if she could add more food to her order. I took her order down, and the lady who I initially sent away saw this and asked, "Why did you scan her order and not mine?" She then started saying stuff like, "Whatever, I guess it doesn't matter, I guess I don't matter." I cut her off and said, "I'm really sorry, it's my first day working here." She seemed to slow her roll, and I got her information. When I brought her food out, she said, "I'm sorry if I was rude to you." I smiled and nodded and said, "It's okay, ma'am. I was going to stop it there. I could have just let it go, but I was angry in that moment." I went on and said, "It was never my intention to make you feel bad. Since it's my first day, they didn't want me taking too many customers, and I had already been helping that other woman, so that's why I helped her and not you initially." I made my voice crack at the end, and this lady was about to open her mouth to say something, but I rushed to the back before she could say anything. Yes, I know it's petty. I should have just been happy with her apology, but I feel like she needed to understand why it's not okay to be rude to people just because something looks a certain way. She needed to realize that she shouldn't be taking things personally, especially when she doesn't even know the person. The way she was talking was like a high school girl who found out that her crush just got a girlfriend. Like, ma'am, you're literally in your late 50s, maybe 60s. When you're that age, you should be mature enough not to take petty little things so personally. So yes, I laid it on thick. Initially, she just thought that I'm a new worker that made a mistake, but then I showed her that I genuinely did nothing wrong and she just overreacted. But at the same time, it's quite literally the truth. I wasn't lying about what happened, but one thing is certain, I guarantee that she's never going to be so rude to anyone else again, so I'm a hero. God damn! At first, I was on the side of the OP while reading this story, but by the end of it, I kinda disliked the OP more than I disliked the rude customer. I'm all for calling out people for their bad behavior, but if you gotta be on a high horse or think you are superior because you called out someone, you're just as bad. It's like those people on Reddit that love to call out Karens, but when you read their stories, it's like they themselves are Karens. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I can't trust anyone who calls themselves the hero in a story. My mother-in-law, female 59, and I, male 36, have been having an emotional affair for 2 years. I'll start by saying the initial infatuation was all me. I've been married for 16 years, but never thought of my mother-in-law in that way. In fact, I thought she was obnoxious, and apparently she thought the same of me. My work relocated us to her town. Being in the same city, we were often working on things together. Things like she needed help painting a room, or she needed help around the house. Neither of us really sought the other. Spending the time with her, I began to get to know her, and eventually I found myself attracted to her. It actually didn't hit me until I had a dream about her. At this point, I feel like I should give some backstory. My father-in-law, which is her husband, had been bedridden for 7 years. Overall, his health isn't good. I'm married to her daughter, of course, but it hasn't been good for a while. Without going into details, I can't leave, at least not until our children are out of the house. Now back to my mother-in-law and I. As we spent time together, I came to realize she faced almost the same things with her husband as I'm currently going through with her daughter. Unfortunately, my father-in-law was diagnosed in the middle of her children becoming adults, and so she had to choose to stay with him to the end. In short, she has been unhappy in her marriage far longer than her husband has been bedridden. During our time together, we have both opened up and shared the difficulties we both face. We grew close and began trusting each other. I made the first move one November night as we hung Christmas lights around her house. She got up on a ladder and I supported her so she wouldn't fall by holding her butt. She never said anything or moved once. The rush was exhilarating. Obviously, I'm a grown man and I have touched a butt before, but the fact that I was doing this with her was a new experience. I didn't know how to feel when I got home and thought it was over later that night. Nothing changed between us, but I retreated into myself and tried to put those thoughts out of my head. At this point, I would regularly meet her for breakfast on Saturday, and my actions didn't change this. The next weekend, we greeted each other as normal. A few weeks went by and I had put it behind me. That was until one night I had a work dinner event and with a few shots of liquid courage, messaged her to see what she was doing. At midnight. She applied with a few jokes, I can't remember, but needless to say, I ended up at her house. Not wasted, but buzzed enough, I flirted with her to come outside and meet me. She was happy to see me when I pulled up. She climbed into my truck, and we chatted about my night for a bit. Then she got a call from my father-in-law asking about the security sensors going off. She told him that I stopped by and that she would be in shortly. She hung up and invited me in so I could finish catching her up. I went inside, spoke to my father-in-law. I apologized for the late visit. He said it was fine. We chatted for a few minutes and then went back to sleep. She and I finished our conversation in the living room. Somewhere in between us talking about my night, she congratulated me on my recent promotion and said she wishes she was able to come out to celebrate. She didn't need to explain, but she did anyways. She said that taking care of my father-in-law took most of her time, so she couldn't be anywhere too long. For whatever reason, I told her that we could celebrate there and now. I had 2 bottles of wine in my truck that were gifted to me on the night of my promotion. She eagerly agreed and said it was an excellent idea, so we opened 1 bottle and settled in the dining room to chat. Halfway into the bottle, I started to feel that I might need to go home soon, before I wouldn't be able to. She seemed to be enjoying herself and not wanting to leave. We both agreed that we would finish the bottle and I would call an Uber to take me home. We sat there for another hour or so chatting and laughing until we finished the bottle. I checked for an Uber, but there were none available, which she then suggested we could crack into the other bottle while we waited. I agreed and ended up drinking the entire second bottle with her. At which point, like clockwork, I received a notification from Uber that it was 5 minutes out. She walked me outside and we chatted while we waited. When I could see the Uber was right around the corner, I hugged her goodbye. The hug lasted about 10 seconds, but in my mind it lasted forever. We both lingered and I even managed to tell her that I had a great night with her after we were hugging. Before we let go, I gave her one last squeeze and kissed her on the neck. I'll be honest, I intended to kiss her on the cheek, but the high of a long hug and my inebriation landed the kiss on her neck between her shoulders and ears. I got into the Uber and was off to my house. I should add that my wife was at an expo for work. The entire ride home I thought about the hug and my kiss. I finally arrived home and got ready for bed. As I laid in bed, I kept thinking of her and what just had happened. I finally drifted to sleep. Another few weeks go by and once again I found myself drinking. This time it was to celebrate my friend getting promoted as well. It was just us guys, so there was no decorum or wine involved. Instead, it was a whole bunch of bourbon. Luckily, we rented a limo bus for the evening so no one had to drive. Unluckily, there was more booze on the bus. By the time I got home, I was so hammered I don't remember messaging her. Apparently, I told her that I had planned our next week's breakfast to a new spot further away and how special it would be if we could get away from them even for a bit. I didn't realize how flirty and direct it had been until the next day when I read the message. I was mortified. To my surprise, she replied later that afternoon telling me how excited she was and how amazing the date sounded. Not to brush over it, but we did end up going on that date, and it was great. But there was no flirting or anything of the sort when we did go. It was no different from having our usual breakfast. To this day, I don't know if she expected more, or if she was happy I found us a new place and we were experiencing something new together. I'm sure I'm overthinking it. A few months later, we find ourselves renovating her kitchen. This was like a 2-week undertaking. In that time, I once again grabbed her butt, to which she never objected. I'd like to think it wasn't my imagination, but a few times she pressed her chest against me as she looked at patterns. She also backed her butt up against me as she inspected the pantry, which was a tight space. I don't mean to come across as a frisky teenager, but her butt was pressed against me for a whole good 5 seconds. Little touches here and there occurred throughout the whole project. On the last weekend, we were cleaning up the dust when the vacuum filter exploded and dust went everywhere. We quickly ran to the backyard and helped dust each other off. She brushed my back off my jeans, my face, and various other places. After this, I felt comfortable and brave enough, so I returned the favor and began dusting her off. Until eventually I was brushing her chest for about 10 seconds, after which she said, "Okay, I'm good." And I thought I was in trouble. Clearly there was no way around it. I was groping her. It wasn't until a few seconds later that I understood I wasn't in trouble. She was noticeably excited. I had turned her on and that was the reason she asked me to stop. A few weeks later, feeling braver, I jokingly asked her to a movie date. She liked and agreed to the date. I felt reassured and confident by the fact that she replied with yes to the date night. We planned on ordering dinner from this new Italian restaurant, a bottle of wine, and a new movie. During the course of our date, she complained that she had a tension headache. I began to rub her scalp, ears, and then her shoulders, all while joking around about it being an age-old Chinese secret that I made up. About 20 minutes in, she thanked me but said she was good. Her tone seemed uncomfortable. Once again, I thought maybe I had done too much in my buzzed state by moving lower. But to my surprise again, a few seconds later, I realized that she wasn't uncomfortable. It was because I once again had turned her on. She was flushed in the face and had to excuse herself to go to the bathroom, and returned more composed. That night we both drank a little more than we intended to, so she suggested I sleep for a bit in the guest bedroom before I drive home. She readied the guest bedroom as I watched. I so desperately wanted to hold her, cuddle her, and even more. We hugged and kissed on the cheek goodnight. She went to her room and left me in the guest room. As I laid in bed, I fantasized about going to her room and making her mine. I thought about what excuses would be acceptable if things didn't work out as I fantasized. In the end, it did nothing and simply laid there in frustration. It's been a total of 2.5 years of this flirtatious behavior. I'd like to think of it as not all in my head, especially after seeing her eyes longing for me and staying longer anytime I have to leave after spending a day with her. My dilemma is I know she wants me as much as I want her, but through our talks, I don't think she can betray her husband, despite her disregard and her discontent with him. And more importantly, she couldn't betray her daughter, again, despite their estranged relationship. In the end, I think I'll make my move after her husband passes. This probably makes me sound like a horrible person, I know, but her daughter and I are nearing divorce. They have no relationship and, as I've said, more or less are estranged, but I have to know the answer to the burning question. This is a real story. If anyone has real advice other than the typical penthouse forum or just bang her, I'd be open to hear it. And I'm also aware there are many men that claim the same only to have fabricated everything in their heads, but the interaction and her behavior above cannot be a coincidence or my own delusions. The original post ends there, but there was a comment that the OP replied to that added more information. The comment reads, "How about getting a divorce and seeing if there's anything else out there? What do you want? A fling, a soulmate, another marriage? Any answer? Is it even possible with her? Is this anything more than trauma bonding? And more importantly, can you betray someone? And can you let someone you care about betray someone else? I ain't got no advice for you, I only got more questions." To which the OP responds, "Honestly, for me, divorce is on the horizon. I know this story shows the dark side of me, but I've tried to keep us together. I won't go into it, but I've legit talked to my wife about getting a third-party professional to help us with our marriage. She simply doesn't want to go. I've gone alone to see if I could better us. In the end, all I'll say is that the relationship is exactly what I asked myself. At what point, per society's eyes, am I not the jerk? At what point am I going to be the douche that left his poor wife? At what point am I allowed to say that I tried and gave it my all? I know that this part of my life is wrong. I know that this doesn't justify my or our actions. I'm not here to be judged. I simply came here to share my story and get advice, however messed up it is. For the future, I know that in general, I don't want to get married again. I don't see the point. I'm not saying I will never find love again or that I'll die alone. I just don't see the point of legally binding myself to another person. I have my children. I lived my life with my wife. Anything after that doesn't require me to marry anyone. As from what I want for her, I want her physically as long as we can or are able to. It may sound strange to others, but I care about my mother-in-law. I can't speak for her part if she chooses to betray anyone. Speaking for myself, I have no negative or positive feelings towards my father-in-law. He and my wife aren't monsters, but they aren't saints. As I write these last sentences, I'm reminded that we aren't anyone to judge others as we don't know the whole story. Is cheating bad? Yes. Should I just leave? Yes. But there are reasons I won't. And if you ask my father-in-law or my wife, they would argue that they not be left divorced. But let me know. Am I the jerk? I did see another comment on this post that said this was like a movie, and I totally agree. Usually, depending on what website you're watching this movie on, the outcome can be very different. Personally, this does seem a little bit like trauma bonding, where two people relate and get attached because of similar traumas they've both experienced. I know the taboo is always curious, but sometimes you gotta stop and think about the outcomes. Something like this would definitely spread like wildfire between families, and this OP would totally be the villain. Unless this mother-in-law is J-Lo or Selma Hayek, I don't think it's worth the trouble. But hey, different strokes for different folks. So your vehicles hold their value? We'll see about that. Back in 2015, I had a 2011 Dodge Caliber. That was beginning to give me some issues. After some research, I found out that the fuse box in the engine compartment was slowly malfunctioning and causing my car to act weird after about an hour of driving. I was on the market looking for a new car as I basically deemed it being time to get me something more suitable for my everyday needs. Not long after, I found the car I was looking for, which was a Kia Sorento. I rented it when the girlfriend and I went on a trip to Seattle, and I immediately was thrown away with how much space was inside the Sorento and that it had a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. I looked at my girlfriend and said, First thing I'm doing once we're back home is going to Kia and getting the Sorento. So once I get back home, I reach out to a family friend who is a finance manager for several dealerships, hoping he would have a contact at Kia. Instead, I got told that he would call me back. My brother then calls me and says he wants to go with me to go check out Jeeps. I told him I was not interested, but he insisted that you will be much happier with the Jeep. I also want to go to see if I can consolidate my cars. To indulge my brother's request, I agree and he meets me at the dealership. In any case, the closest vehicle they had on the lot that would even come close to the Kia Sorento was a Jeep Grand Cherokee. As I am perusing the lot, my brother shows up with my sister-in-law. My brother is driving a 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and my sister-in-law is driving their 2012 Kia Forte. Both of their cars appeared to be in immaculate condition, and both with less than 20,000 miles. We walk in and I get taken away by one of the sales reps, while another sales rep talks to my brother and sister-in-law. I begin to tell the sales rep that I want to trade in my car for the Grand Cherokee, and go on to say that I am trying to keep my bill under $1,000 a month. That means that I want to even get a base model as long as it has towing capability. I found the exact one I wanted for $45,000, which would later come up to $53,000 after taxes and fees. We go back to his office to run numbers, and the sales rep comes back and asks if I'm willing to put another $5,000 down. At this point, I was confused. I have always prided myself in having great credit, and I have a very long history of always taking care of my credit. I had also explained that I was already putting $5,000 down, so why do another $5,000? After I say no, the guy walks away and talks to what appears to be the sales manager. After some back and forth, the guy comes back with the manager in tow. The sales rep sits down and the manager says, "Listen, these are Jeeps you're looking into. I won't lie to you. If you don't put another $5,000 down, you are looking at a monthly bill of $1,200. That confused the hell out of me, as I realized that the bill I'd pay after 60 months, that would be in the ballpark of $72,000. So I said, I need to see the numbers you are crunching because this is definitely not adding up. How does a bill that after everything is said and done at $53,000 suddenly equate to $72,000? The sales rep looks at the manager and the manager just looks back at the rep and just says, "Listen, they are Jeeps. They retain their value. If you can't afford it, then we can't help you." So I cut my losses and start heading out when I remember that my brother was there with a Jeep looking to trade it in. So cue my malicious compliance. I quickly beeline straight to the office my brother and sister-in-law are in just at the right time. They had just received the appraisal reports for both vehicles, but I was mostly interested in the Jeep Grand Cherokee. As I walk in, the sales rep working with them stops and asks what I am doing, and I say, "Don't worry, I'm with them. That's my brother and that's my sister-in-law." So the guy doesn't mind, and just as he is about to give the discussion of the report, the sales manager walks in and says, "If you guys aren't going to buy a car today, please leave." "What's wrong? I just came over here to wait for my brother who's trying to consolidate his vehicles. I believe your sales rep just needs to discuss the appraisal report." The manager then says, "He doesn't have to discuss that in front of you." I then looked at my brother and said, "Do you give me consent to be here while the report is read?" And my brother immediately said, "Yeah, that's fine." At that point, the sales manager basically grabbed the reports and tore them up in front of us and said, "We will no longer be doing business with you. Leave now." Immediately after that, I called my buddy again and asked if he worked with the specific Kia dealership I had in mind. And within 1 hour, he traded my Dodge Caliber for a Kia Sorento I wanted. At that moment, my brother and sister-in-law saw the Sorento and both agreed that it was significantly more spacious than the Grand Cherokee. Oh, and to add insult to injury, my family friend actually was able to pull up the report of the appraisal. The 2014 Grand Cherokee was purchased at $37,000, and in 1 year with 1,500 miles had dropped the value to $18,000. No accidents, no mechanical problems, no issues with the body, just suddenly depreciated. So much for holding their value. But let me know, am I the jerk? Shopping for cars is the worst. I remember when I was looking to buy my first brand new vehicle a few years ago, I went into a dealership near my job and asked if I could test drive a Scion. I wasn't sold on the car, but a friend of mine spoke highly of theirs. After the test drive, they always want to talk numbers. I told them that I wasn't ready for that, but of course they insisted. So I humor them and tell them that I won't pay anything more than $400 a month and that I want the car at a certain price point. This This is when the dealership starts the good cop, bad cop routine. If you've never heard of this, pay close attention. You see, the first sales guy I dealt with just magically got sick out of nowhere after I told him the numbers I was looking at. So salesman number 2 comes in, and this is bad cop. And he tries to basically intimidate me into changing my mind by saying that I'm getting a great deal and that I would basically be foolish for not taking the offer. I had already expected this, and I told them, well, then bring back my keys or ID. I'm not really sure what they had of mine, but I knew that they had something that I couldn't just walk out. So bad cop leaves all mad, and then good cop shows up. A far less aggro type of guy that tries to see what's wrong and what he can do to make things right for me. I just straight up tell him that he can give me my stuff because I'm done here, and that is what he can do. Once he knows that I'm not changing my mind, I brought my stuff and I go out the door. It was totally a terrible experience. I did end up buying a car a few months later from a different place, and I will say, if you get a chance, try to speak to an older car salesman, because I feel like they are nicer and they care more about customer service. At least that's what happened when I finally bought my car. I'm 23 and I've ruined my life. I'm sure many of you think I deserve it, and maybe you're right. Just save the comments. Anything you say, I already tell myself almost daily. 11 years ago, I was dating a woman who was absolutely crazy. Like, dropped my dog off on the side of the road, stole my dead mother's engagement ring, harassed my parents for breaking up with her for cheating types of crazy. I also have severe bipolar disorder leaning towards mania. At this point, I was undiagnosed, but very manic most of the time. This will be relevant later. I had someone, a local bar owner, come to me and a friend asking us to set his competition on fire. I was desperate, unemployed, and he offered me enough to pay my bills for 2 more months. Since my water had already been turned off, and I was lucky to eat once every 2 days, because of this dismal state, and my friend not much better, we both agreed. Later I found out this friend and 2 others were sleeping with my girlfriend. I learned this after the fact when I got my paperwork in jail. This translated to pillow talk that led her in on the whole plot. After a while, I backed out. I was afraid of jail and would rather risk homelessness. Unfortunately, by now I knew everything and my friends still told me every little detail. There were 3 attempts to burn the bar down. The first was the ceiling, and it failed to light. The second was in the closet in the bathroom. The fire department put it out, but the bar was back open the next day. The third, a garden sprayer full of gasoline was used across the back of the building and it lit. This time it burned down. After successfully burning the bar, my friend came to my house to brag. Shortly after the third and final attempt, my GF's infidelity came to light and I dumped her and all hell broke loose. As she was getting her things from my house, I was at my grandfather's house, she went through my safe that I had stupidly left open and stole my mother's ring, took my dog and dropped her off on the side of the road, and eventually started harassing my parents to get in touch with me when I stopped answering her calls. Knowing the plot, she went to the police and told them that I was responsible for burning the bar down. I was arrested by the ATF outside of the apartment I was about to lose anyways, and was taken in for questioning. I hadn't eaten in 3 days at the time or showered in a week. I was extremely naive, immature, and manic. They gave me food and I told them everything. Again, I'm not proud of my actions. They put me in a hotel and gave me $500. I was finally able to shower and do laundry. They asked me to wear a wire for them against the guy that organized it, and I did. I gave them everything they wanted without hesitation, thinking I was being rewarded for doing the right thing. A few months later, I found a job waiting tables, and while in my car, was working my way back and saving. One of the officers called me and invited me for coffee. When we met, he served me a federal indictment. Still very naive, I didn't worry. I accepted it thinking nothing was going to happen and this was a formality. I went on with my day and went to court when I was supposed to. I got to my arraignment and my public defender pulled me aside and told me I'm pleading not guilty. I responded, but I am guilty, and he told me just to keep quiet. After my arraignment, I was detained and taken to the county jail because I had no address to be released to. The official charge was conspiracy to commit arson. Over the next 8 months, I went through the court process and took a plea deal for my cooperation. I was sentenced to a year and a day. The extra day made me eligible for good time, so I was released after 10.5 months. I spent almost 2 months in federal prison. I was also sentenced to pay jointly the restitution of several $100,000. After I was released, I got on a bus across country with $120 in my pocket. I started over with no friends, no family, no job, and nowhere to go. I made my regular mandated 200-month restitution payments for a while, fell on hard times, missed a few months, and now I'm having my wages garnished. My life has effectively been ruined, and I've got nobody to blame but myself. I don't tell anyone about this for obvious reasons. A select few of my friends know about it, but they don't know the details. Again, for obvious reasons. It's been 11 years since this all happened, and I still have nightmares. I'm now 34, but let me know. Am I the jerk? This was pretty heavy and I actually feel for the OP. I can relate to having to deal with a crazy ex. I dated someone for 5 years that used to do substances before we got together and always had cravings to do them again, which I was told by a friend near the end of our relationship that she ended up doing. After I broke up with her, she would call me talking about harming herself and ending it. She also would call my mom and tell her that she was pregnant, and this made my mom think I was the father, which I wasn't. And when I got a new girlfriend, she checked herself into a crisis center and called my mom to have her tell me. It was a crazy time and has definitely made me hesitant to relationships or people similar to her since then. Be careful who you choose to spend your time with. It might just end up ruining your life. Boss demands that I stay in my lane, so I force her to do what she hates most. Some time ago, I used to work in a medical specialty office. It was ID, or infectious disease, as a medical assistant. Some quick side information, I used to work in the food industry and was always told that I wouldn't ever contribute to society or do anything meaningful in my life. While I absolutely loved working as a chef and a baker at the time, I wanted to do more with my life and prove to myself that I wasn't as useless as people made me out to be. Not that I believe that for 1 second, but in my culture, if you aren't a businessman or a doctor, you're lower than everyone else. It's pretty horrible, but that's how the culture is. I now live in the US and it's been pretty good. Back to the story. I graduated top 3 in my class and was certified through AAMA and scored in the 90th percentile, so I knew my stuff. But I never worked a white-collar job in my life, so I was afraid that I would seem out of place. I did my externship at the ID clinic in my town, and they loved my interpersonal skills. They loved my work and stated that I would be offered a job at the end of my externship. I was elated. I was so happy to have a job secured and have my foot in the door into the medical field. It turns out my blue-collar experience helped me relate with a lot of the patients, and they appreciated my work more for it. As my time went on, my experience working in the medical field became less about the money and more about the people I can help with my direct patient care. They weren't just charts, MRNs, medical number records for those non-medical folks, and diagnosis. They were Jeff, who ran the local farmers market, or Meg, who worked with the kids at the Y. I cared for my patients, and our repeats would always look forward to coming back to see me and chat. I loved working with my patients. So at the end of the externship, I was extended an offer of employment for a decent amount of money. It was more than my other classmates were offered at this practice, but still not a whole lot. And I took it. I was to be a medical assistant in charge of direct patient care. This meant check-ins, rooming, dealing with prescriptions, performing and searching for labs, packing wounds, and doing dressing changes. Being officially a part of the office now, I was determined to work my butt off and show myself and my colleagues that I could do it. I continued to do my work and care for my patients. However, over time, I would notice certain things weren't in my job duties that I could do that would help out the patients. Certain things like calling their doctors for update orders or checking for records from local hospitals. Also helping patients find good home health or SNFs, skilled nursing facilities, generally the medical scheduler's job. This also included looking into insurance coverages, billing, and checking referral statuses, referral coordinates, among other things. Doing these tasks meant a lot more work on my end, but it also meant the best care that I could offer my patients. This went on for a year, and my patients were happy and willing to come to their appointments. Apparently, not a whole lot of people like coming to a building with the words infectious disease in big print on its side. Then one day, out of the blue, I was called into my supervisor's office. Young, naive me thought, oh great, they've been seeing how hard I'm working and I'm finally getting recognized. Maybe they'll promote me to lead. Nope. My boss, Shelly, told me that I'm working too hard and sticking my finger in too many pots. I asked where this was coming from. She stated that I was staying more than 5 minutes late too many times and it's because I'm doing too much work. She said, we can't keep paying you all this overtime. I think I was maybe 30 minutes overtime at most. She said that's still too much. I'm doing too much work. I was baffled, absolutely stunned. I thought I was doing the practice a service, but she undermined the entirety of my last year's hard work I put in. I was frustrated and a bit upset, but tried my best to remain professional. So I asked her what she would like me to do, and the next words out of her mouth were the ones that she would regret. Well, I see you're doing a lot of tasks that are meant for other positions. Maybe you should stop doing those and just stay in your lane. She then proceeded to write me up for trying to abuse the time clock. Insert Jim Carrey's, "Alrighty then," and cue malicious compliance. I asked her to send me a list of exactly what my job duties are, and she said she would be happy to. It listed most of what I originally meant to do, except it didn't include dressing changes and packing wounds. I saw this and immediately knew that this would be trouble for my boss. You see, she was the only other medical assistant on our end of the office that was certified to deal with minor wounds and dressings. Since I was the main contact for patients, that would fall on her plate. So I told my patients that I won't be doing any extra work because it goes against the practice's wishes, and I was told not to. All of them understood, but it's tough to get patients to keep appointments when things get delayed. Not long after the order was issued, I got my first page for a wound pack. Excellent. One thing to note about my boss is she absolutely hates feet. And one thing to note about infectious disease clinics is that we dealt with a lot of diabetic foot infections, at least 2 or 3 a day. Doc wants to see how it's healing, so he removes the wrap and unpacks the foot. Spent a little extra with the patient and now has to get to his next appointment. I'm paged by the doc to pack the foot. Wet to dry. Not a problem, doc. I'll get Shelly for you. He gives me this kind of odd look, but continues to his next appointment. Shelly gloves up, and as soon as she passes the threshold of the room and notices it's a diabetic foot, she holds back her gags and immediately starts sweating. I pass by the room and she asks for my help. As calmly as I could, I turn and said, "Sorry, boss, packing wounds isn't on my list. Can't do it. Gotta stay in my lane. By the way, it's 2 o'clock and at 3 there's a through and through foot infection. Probably should get that packed soon too." I'm glad we were wearing masks because she couldn't see the massive grin I had on my face through this whole encounter. She tried to write me up about disobeying superiors, but I had spoken with my GM and she was behind me. Instead, she ended up getting written up for trying to put wound packs back on my list after she told me I did too much work. She ended up having to do part of the medical scheduler's job, part of the referral coordinate's job, and part of the billing office's job, as she had let go of one of our front desk office staff because there was not enough work to go around. There was plenty of work. I was doing it. She didn't last long after that. The burnout got to her and she stepped down from the supervisor position 4 months after that. They ended up hiring another super, and I left the practice shortly after I got COVID. They told me to come back into work after 3 days while I was still very symptomatic. So I told them that I wouldn't be endangering my patients like that and to shove it. Last I heard, they have an entirely new front office staff and they're perpetually short-handed. They should have just let me drive my own path instead of telling me to stay in their silly lanes. But let me know. Am I the jerk? Another good employee destroyed by the budget. It's crazy how powerful money is in our everyday lives. What is even crazier is when people who have nothing to do with the day-to-day work are the ones making the decisions to make sure no one goes over their hours. Now, I will say I understand that this is a business and I've worked with my fair share of overtime abusers, but this supervisor could have handled this situation a lot different. I wouldn't have written up the OP for one thing, but I would have also just explained that they need to cut back on something, or I would have offered to help them, especially if I had a task that I hated, like working with feet like this supervisor did. I would treat people that do the tasks I hate with the utmost respect and care. Hopefully that supervisor learned this very good life lesson after this. You need to be better at timekeeping. Okay then, I will. I saw this post earlier on that reminded me of a story from a job I had a few years back, and one of the worst bosses I ever worked with. The story goes like this. This one day in particular, I arrived at work the same time as my team lead's boss. I walk across the car park and in through the doors of our office, merely seconds after him. He doesn't say anything to me from across the car park, even though he saw me. He doesn't even acknowledge me at all. The time is 7:03 and I was supposed to start at 7 o'clock, just like him. Later that day, my team lead gets an email from this guy telling me to give me a bollocking for being late. My team lead, who also happens to be a good buddy of mine outside of work, didn't give me the bollocking, but instead he replied to his boss and told him that I regularly work an hour or so later after work and don't claim any overtime. At the time, I was young and didn't have any commitments waiting for me back home, and I was the type of guy who would want to finish a job before leaving. My team lead's boss said he didn't care, that my workday started at 7 and that he expected me at my desk at that time every day. He said that he was sick of my relaxed attitude towards timekeeping. My buddy showed me the email back and forth between them, which he wasn't supposed to do, and just shrugged and said something like, "At least you know now, I don't give a crap. Just as far as I'm concerned, you do more than your stated hours, but he's clearly gunning for you. Just watch your back." So I decided that I'd take my boss's words to heart, and from that day until I left for a much better job, I arrived at work at 6:50 every morning, got myself a morning brew, and sat at my desk not doing anything until 7, when I would start work. Even when I got to the office early, I'd sit in the car park until it was time, and I left exactly on my out time of 3:30. Every single day. The boss didn't notice, of course, until a few months later a big job dropped just before home time, as they often did, and they needed someone to stay on. There was the usual rushing around and hushed discussion from the management about it, and then the boss came over and asked me if I wouldn't mind staying on to do the job. I was usually the guy for the job in these circumstances. Most everybody else had young families that they needed to go home to. Now, I would have stayed on and earned myself some sweet overtime. I had nowhere I needed to be or anything I particularly wanted to do. But at the time, he was asking me, and it was only a few minutes before I had to go home. I told the boss that I wouldn't be staying on to do the job. He asked why, and I pointed to the clock and said, "Because it's home time." With that, I shut down my computer, put on my coat, and went to leave. He asked me if I had something to go to, if I had plans for the evening or something, and I just replied blankly, "Nope," and then politely said goodbye over my shoulder as I left. Of course, he was absolutely fuming, but he had no power to compel me to stay, and he knew it. I found out in the days that followed that he blew his top and asked my team lead to gather my time logs over the past couple of months, since he ordered him to bollock me for those 3 minutes that I was late. He wanted to haul me over the coals for something. When he realized I was keeping exactly the hours I was contracted to keep, he pulled me into his office and asked why I wasn't being as committed to my role as I used to be, staying back late to get stuff done. I smiled and very politely explained that staying late after home time for no pay is something that is done out of goodwill, and that he had eroded all the goodwill when he had my team lead give me a bollocking for being 3 minutes late, on a day when I got to work at the exact same time as him. And I explained that from that point onwards my goodwill was gone and I was only going to do what my employment contract asked of me and nothing more. He was so red in the face that I could tell he wanted to lose his cool at me, but he had no legs to stand on. My timekeeping had been impeccable, and the work I was doing while at work was in good standard. He had nothing. All he could do was say he was disappointed that I felt that way. I shrugged and asked him if there was anything else. There wasn't, so I got up and left his office. I kept my nose clean for a little over a year after that incident, but he was always trying to get me for some reason or another. In the end, I found a very nice job elsewhere, and I heard that after I left, just about the entire department followed suit. But let me know. Am I the jerk? This seems very similar to some of the actions I took after run-ins with my aggro bosses at my old job. I've mentioned many times that I left my old job for a bunch of reasons, but one of the main reasons was because I had a boss that was trying to get me fired because he didn't like that I told him, and I quote, that he needed to figure something out when I was on vacation and no one would be in charge. I also had a boss/lead that would let me in on information that I wasn't supposed to have, so I could easily prepare for a counterattack against this bad boss when he tried to pull some stuff. Working at that old job gave me endless amounts of malicious compliances. Welcome to the unending notebook emporium. When I was a student, I earned some extra cash money by working in a stationery shop in a university town. I only worked on the weekends, and since there was no deliveries or post-lecture rushes, we usually had 3 of us on duty. At first, it was me, Electron, a physics student with a little time for humans, and Josh, the weekend manager. Josh was a surfer dude, always really relaxed, knew most of the job was BS, and freely told us that the only thing he liked was chatting with us and the customers. We developed a great group of repeat customers who liked the store being quieter and being able to talk to us and whatever problems they had. On that basis, Josh had agreed that the policy whereby the weekday team did all the scheduled tasks when there were more staff on duty. But on the weekend, all we did was filling empty shelves in sales. Unfortunately, Josh's main job as a water sports instructor was really taking off, and his days of selling paper clips were over. Neither I or Electron had any interest in being responsible for keys, cash balancing, and explaining to sketchy folks why we stopped selling those little resealable plastic bags. So we didn't inquire about the weekend manager job, and we weren't asked either. Apparently a weekday worker, Susan, asked for the hours. I like Susan. She often took weekend shifts when one of us was out of town, and she blended well with our team. But a storm was brewing. The owner had decided that weekend manager was a pointless job title, and that an experienced salesperson could handle the weekend crew. So when Susan was offered the opportunity to run the weekend team, it was not on the management pay scale, it was on a $1 hour supplement. I genuinely did feel sorry for her. Neither me nor Electron would have taken on the responsibility for an extra $8 more per shift. She negotiated him up to $1.50 an hour, but most importantly for her, agreed that though contractually she'd be a salesperson, at the weekend she would be referred to as manager. I know this because she spent the first month drilling this point home, and she printed out a special badge that said manager. Then got upset when the store's assistant manager, Alice, told her that she wasn't allowed to wear it on weekdays. This created a rift that Alice never forgot. Alice told us when covering one weekend that Susan had also promised everyone that she would whip the weekend team into shape, and that Josh had allowed us to become lazy. Alice thought the whole thing was hilarious and said that it was pointless anyways. The owner had far bigger priorities than this store, and also as long as we were ticking over a profit, he really could care less about the sales volume from week to week, or who worked that shift. To get Susan out of his hair, he agreed that if she could boost sales in her first 2 months, that she would get a reward. And wouldn't you know it, in the first 2 months, which happened to be a new academic year, sales were indeed boosted. She got a $25 gift voucher to another store that he owned. She told Electron and me that it was a clear example of how hard work pays off. We simply needed to apply ourselves and follow her instructions. One Sunday, I was talking to a student who wanted to buy a USB stick for his university work. I was talking to him about how to back up your data and that a single USB stick might not be sufficient. Electron was explaining something I didn't understand to someone who I also could not understand. Susan emerged from the small office at the back of the store where she had started to spend most of her time working on the system. It was very unclear what the system did or why it had worked so effortlessly during Josh's tenure and now required constant babysitting. But her time with the system was unavoidable and critical to our success. "This shelf isn't full," she said to the open floor. I turned around and she was pointing at the shelf of notebooks. The owner had struck a killer deal on multiple pallets of garnishly colored notebooks, and now we had thousands of them in the stockroom. The weekday team had put about 100 of them on the shelf. But as they were cheap and selling quickly, a fairly noticeable gap had developed. Normally, I would grab some when I happened to go into the stockroom for something else, but that hadn't happened in a while. I went back to talking to the customer, but then she grabbed my shoulder and jerked it back. "Bobby Bumblebee," she said. "When I ask a question, I expect a response." The young guy I was talking to looked horrified and started to back away. "Are you gonna buy that?" she asked him, pointing at the USB stick in his hands. He shook his head, muttered something apologetically, and put it back on the shelf before rushing out of the shop. "Another time waster," she said to me. "No more wasting time on chat. You're either at the register selling or you're filling up shelves. We got plenty of notebooks in the stockroom, and there's no excuse for empty shelves. I expect every space filled." She turned and marched back to the little office. She looked over at Electron and pointed at him. "That goes for you too, Electron." He looked back at her with a look of total confusion, but he usually did, so it didn't stand out. Then as she slammed the office door behind her, a light bulb went off in my head. "Electron," I said, "did you hear her say every space?" He nodded and started to smile. He apologized to his customer for no longer being permitted to talk to them, and we started a Herculean tag team effort in the stockroom. I brought out the first batch on the trolley and filled the notebook shelf. It looked pretty good. We were waiting for a shipment of printer paper, so there was a big gap in that section. Not anymore. I stocked those notebooks a yard high. I thought Susan might hear the noise and come out, but she was far too busy. Electron spent some time manning the register, but mostly we were filling shelves, until eventually we had filled the shelves. It looked like a kid had eaten an entire pack of highlighters and spewed across the whole store. I realized though that she said every space, not every shelf. I created a new tower near the office door. It was a majestic sight, almost 6 feet high in the center. Electron crowned it with the roll of sparkling glitter tape. To me, it was my Washington monument. It was at this point that I heard, "What the hell?" You see, the one thing I knew that no one else did was that Alice was coming in at the end of the day to collect some paperwork. "Welcome to the unending notebook emporium," I said. I then told Alice how we had been berated earlier in the day and that we were now following Susan's strict instructions. Thankfully, Alice thought it was hilarious. She did ask, though, how Susan had failed to notice what we were doing. She'd been working on the system for the last 3 hours, I explained. Alice went up to the door, but rather than knocking on it, she just flung it open. Susan had been sitting in the office chair with her feet on the desk reading a novel, and had jolted herself so violently that the chair had shot out from behind her and she was now rolling around on the floor. Alice closed the shop, told Electron and me that she'd get things straightened out and that we should report as usual the following weekend. I wish I could say that Susan was fired and that Alice had taken over weekend management. But for some reason, Alice and the store manager decided to give her a second chance. Susan did have to stay late to move all of the notebooks spread across random shelves to my notebook tower. Though I must say with less architectural flair than I had done. It still stood, although slightly diminished, a week later when I came back from my next shift. I have no idea what was said to Susan after the store closed, but she never wore that badge or shouted again. She also spent a lot of time on the floor and started to give us extremely clear instructions with absolutely no ambiguity. This was a great source of amusement for Electron, who occasionally played up to it. My personal favorite being when he asked if selling as much printer ink as possible meant he should lower the price to 1 cent. A few months later, both Electron and I finished our degrees and left. Neither of us worked in retail again. Electron went on to gain a PhD in physics, and we still keep in touch. But I still have no idea what he was talking about or what he does for a living. Alice later took over as the store manager, and Susan, as far as I can make out, left a couple years after me and now works as an assistant manager at a nearby supermarket. I like to think that she treats people better now, but who knows? At the very least, I hope that every time she sees a notebook, she remembers the day she spawned the unending notebook emporium. But let me know. Am I the jerk? Now this story brought back memories because this is a classic retail malicious compliance. We would do this all the time at the warehouse that I worked at. Some manager always wanted the area to look stocked, but never said that we needed to be fully stocked. So most times we would just move all the items up to the edge of the shelf. Now, of course, this did cause a problem when those items did actually run out, but it was something management had to deal with, or it was a good way to get some extra hours on the week's check if we felt like we needed them. Either way, you should be careful with what you ask for when it comes to retail workers. My girlfriend's coworker hated me, so I exposed that she was cheating on her husband. So this story took place over a decade ago, but it is something that I think about from time to time. And I need to know if I was the jerk for doing what I did. You see, during this time, I was dating a girl for about 2 years or so. And it was one of those relationships that you look back on and realize that it should have ended way sooner. But what can you do, right? That's life. Well, anyways, this relationship had a lot of ups and downs like any relationship might. But some issues started because my girlfriend got a new job at a fancy little self-care place. I don't want to give out too many details of her workplace for the sake of not doxing her or myself. One of the first issues that came up from her working here was she was getting a little too close to a guy that worked in a nearby shop. Now, I want to point out that I wasn't a jealous guy at this point, and I never cared if my girlfriend talked to other guys because, well, I had a lot of friends that were girls that I wanted to talk to, so fair is fair. That's until she told me that this guy was getting a little bit aggressive and kissed her. Her explanation to why he was able to get this close was because she felt like I didn't care that she was talking to another guy. Basically, she wanted me to be jealous of this dude. She was that type of girl, and I think you can see why this should have ended way sooner. Anyways, after this point, I started getting a little bit concerned about her hanging out with other dudes. Also, I know what some of you might be thinking, he kissed her? Sounds a bit fishy, and I agree, but I was super young at the time, and you know the saying, young, dumb, and full of, well, you get the picture. After a whole discussion about this incident, things changed and she stopped talking to this guy and we tried to move on with our relationship, but the intrusive thoughts of my girlfriend talking to other guys would happen from time to time. It didn't help that my friend had a coworker that was pretty promiscuous. You see, this coworker was a pretty attractive woman who was married and had a kid. But she also wasn't scared to openly talk about her adventurous life. She even sold adult toys on the side. Now I want to make it clear, I don't have an issue with people that do any of this. To be honest, I actually find these type of people very interesting nowadays and even support their work. But back when I was young and dumb, I thought this coworker was a bit sus and I didn't like that she seemed to be getting pretty close to my girlfriend. Turns out the feelings were mutual because my girlfriend would tell me that this coworker wasn't too fond of me either. Now I'm not too sure if you've ever been in a relationship where your partner has friends that don't like you, but what usually happens is that particular friend most likely badmouths you when they're in private. And since they work together, I'm pretty sure this happened a lot. I have no idea what my girlfriend at the time was telling her. Like I said, this was a relationship that probably should have ended way sooner because of all the ups and downs. Well, one day I come to find out that this coworker has been making a bunch of comments about me because I wasn't the happiest about my girlfriend buying some of her merch. Again, I was young and dumb. I thought my girlfriend was buying these certain items meant that I wasn't good enough for her. I could care freaking less about this type of stuff today. But after hearing a bunch of these comments, it sealed the deal for my hatred for this woman and I vowed my revenge. But I had no idea how I was going to do that. I mean, in reality, I didn't really talk to this woman. I basically found out everything through my girlfriend. But remember how I said this coworker was really open about their life? So open that she told my girlfriend that she met a new man the other night and they hooked up. She said it was one of the best hookups she had because this guy was packing, if you know what I mean. She went on to say that she really likes him and would be seeing him again. In case you forgot, this coworker is married with a child. Cue revenge plot. If I'm being honest, it's always been a fear of mine of my girlfriend possibly cheating on me, especially after the whole kiss event. But I've never liked cheating, period. My first ever girlfriend cheated on me, so I've always hated the idea of cheating and people being unfaithful. I mean, if you want to hook up with other people, just break up. So once I found out my girlfriend was getting close to a woman who was married and cheating on their husband, I could only imagine what ideas she might be putting into my girlfriend's head. So in my mind, I wanted to knock her down a peg before she poisoned my girlfriend's mind. Granted, I know this sounds like my girlfriend couldn't think for herself, but I'm just giving you my perspective on this whole situation. Now that I know that this woman was cheating, I needed to find a way to expose her, but I didn't know how. Like I mentioned, I didn't really talk to her much, and I definitely didn't know her husband. But then it hit me. I knew exactly how to expose this cheater. Not everyone will remember this, but there used to be a very popular gossip website that exposed people and even celebrities at the time. Well, you could search by city on this website and see what was happening around you. So now that I had the way to expose her, I just needed some evidence. I couldn't just call her out and say she cheated. There needed to be some kind of connection or paper trail that could lead back to her. It was at this moment that the revenge god sent me the perfect gift. My girlfriend came home one day and was super pissed at this coworker for some reason. I don't remember what set her off, but basically she didn't consider her a friend anymore. But she also let me in on some more information about this coworker's affair. Turns out that this coworker was going to meet her new lover with another friend who was also having an affair. Think of it as a cheating double date. But they were going out that night. So I decided to write up my exposed post for this gossip website. I used the people's names that were involved and gave all the details that I had about the affair. I even mentioned that they were on a double date on this particular night. I felt like something was missing from the whole post to really set it off, but I didn't know what it was until I realized that the woman the coworker was going out with posted a photo of them hanging out that night. So I used that photo as the cherry on top to accompany the post. Now I wasn't completely moralist in this whole situation. I told my girlfriend what I was going to do and if she was cool with me doing it. She told me that she didn't care, and I kind of think she wanted to expose her. I believe she got to meet the husband and child a few times, so she probably felt bad that this coworker was cheating on her family. So that's all I needed to send out this post. If I'm being honest with you, I didn't think that this post was going to get any traction and get back to the cheaters. I thought it was something that was going to get buried under all the other crappy people that were being exposed on that website. Well, I was totally wrong because not even 48 hours later, the poop was hitting the fan. My girlfriend came home letting me know that the coworker was in a panic because someone exposed them on a gossip website. Turns out the other married woman was the one that found out first and called the coworker in a panic that she was going to get caught and didn't want to end up getting divorced. The coworker was stressing out because I don't think she had a good enough alibi to talk herself out of this. Turns out that by this time she had been meeting up with this secret lover a few times to hook up in parking lots and stuff. I'm a bit fuzzy on the details, but I vaguely remember my girlfriend telling me that the husband did find out about the affair. But I don't know if they ended up getting a divorce because my girlfriend didn't stay at that job much longer after that. So yeah, that's the story about how I got revenge on my girlfriend's coworker who hated me. But let me know, am I the jerk? Wow, this was a wild story, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm curious about this website the OP was talking about because I remember a couple of sites like this back in my day. I don't think any of them are still active because everyone just exposes people on Twitter now. I will say the OP does come off a bit insecure here. They were pretty vague on the details of exactly what was being said about them, but nonetheless, I can't say I blame him for exposing the cheating coworker. I'm all for people living their lives the way they want. If you want to hook up with a bunch of people, good for you, but it shouldn't come at the expense of others. This coworker was probably having a good time while the husband was at home with the baby, which if the roles were reversed, we all would hate the man in this situation. My only hope is that the men that were getting cheated on in this story ended up getting out of these bad relationships, because I don't think there's any way to work through those types of issues. My entitled parents made my life hell, so I had to outsmart them in clever ways. I'm an only child, not much extended family, and both parents were certainly doing their best, having themselves been poorly treated growing up, but sometimes a person's best is still not ideal. I grew up with this kind of parenting style where the kid could never win. There was always some sort of power trip, physical punishment for no clear reason, that would increase in severity if I so as much asked what I had actually done wrong, which led to, "You never question me." I had to follow weird rules to the absolute letter that didn't make much logical sense, but they only applied to me. My dad was the most controlling and would often try to intimidate me. Someone once said that he had small man syndrome, and at the time I guess I was the only one smaller than him. I would cop it if I did not do exactly what he said, in exactly the way he said it. Being pretty bright, I learned to find loopholes in his rules, and he couldn't say anything about it if I exploited them because I'd technically done what he asked. This story is about one of those times. I was careful not to do this so often in case he stopped being so super literal. To set the scene some more, I was a neglected child. My parents were the right-wing Christian hippie anti-vax type, in the sense that I was homoempathically vaccinated. But honestly, they would make sure I took the full course of what was essentially sugar pills, so I didn't even have to claim being homoempathically vaccinated to my name. With the ironic exception of that, all forms of sugar were the devil. And at some point, I even remember not being allowed things like apple juice because it apparently made me hyper and I would run around a lot. I grew up on goat and soy milk, not cow's milk, because it leaches calcium from the bone. I couldn't be myself. I've since learned that I'm naturally peppy, so you have to understand that I was fed in a way that discouraged this. Of course, our house was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop on the other side of the house. I had high anxiety and was depressed at a fundamental level. I wasn't encouraged to go out on play dates with school friends. I wasn't allowed Barbies in case I tried to be too sexy. I wasn't allowed to watch Sesame Street because Oscar the Grouch has a bad attitude and it might rub off. I constantly would get asked by kids in my class if I was anorexic, and I didn't even know what that meant. On the rare occasions that I received lollies or chocolates as a gift or prize, they'd go up on a very top of a pantry out of reach, but within eyesight. For a time when I deserved to enjoy something a little special. They stayed up there for years. Typically, that pile was only ever added to. Maybe a couple of times I remember being allowed to select one single item, literally a single lolly from a party flavor lolly pack kind of thing. Occasionally on holiday, I'd get to have something yummy as a treat, but it was usually my mother sharing something with me in a close and secret way so my dad would never know. One morning on holiday, we were having toast for breakfast. I had 2 pieces of toast on my plate. On the table was a nice proper jam, as well as the usual, for example, Marmite despite being Australian. As expected, I was not permitted jam in everyday life. and I knew never to ask. But we were on holiday and it was proper jam. I hadn't done anything wrong lately, and I thought not being able to have jam once was stupid. I asked and I was told no. I asked again, adding, "But we're on holiday. I never get to have jam, please." My mom conceded, saying something like, "Oh, come on. We rarely go away and it's lovely jam with real fruit." But it was my dad who decided this stuff. Eventually he conceded. "Yes, okay, but you can only put jam on one piece of toast." I thanked him and repeated, "I can only put the jam on one piece of toast? With my knife?" He said yes. I clarified again and he said yes. So I did, but he hadn't specified the quantity or the manner in which I had to eat it. I grinned, this big I got you grin. I put heaps of jam on one piece of toast. He tried to stop me, but I reminded him of what he had just said. I took the other in my hand and I smushed them both together. His eyes bugged out of his head. When I pulled them apart, both pieces had the perfect amount of jam. I said, "Oh, wow! I thought I wanted to have a toast as a sandwich, but actually, I changed my mind. Oh well." I was then able to enjoy 2 delicious pieces of toast. The look on his face was magical. He was angry and tried to tell me off. I reminded him that he had already confirmed a few times that I could only use my knife to put jam on one piece of toast. He was flustered because I had beaten him. My mother had a very amused look on her face, and I think she was a little proud. He couldn't punish me directly for having too much jam, as he hadn't specified the quantity. Technically, it was in the rules. I can't remember what happened afterwards. I wouldn't be surprised if I somehow copped extra for an unrelated thing. Most of my childhood is a weird blur, but there is always a silver lining. I learned to be very quick-witted. I am very good at noticing discrepancies, logic gaps, and loopholes. I only exploit them if I think the person is being objectively ridiculous, and even then, rarely. It's a power that should only be used for good. But let me know, am I the jerk? Dude, reading this made me kinda sad. Like, at times I thought my childhood was bad because I had dyslexia and I suffered from like bad middle child syndrome. But then I hear some other people's issues that are similar to this OP's and I just think, maybe I didn't have it that bad. In reality though, I definitely know those things in my childhood have affected my mindset in adulthood. But I hope this OP has a better life now and can fully and truly be themselves without the fear of getting punished. Being from the South, stories like this are all too common. Why yes, I would love to convert a 10-minute task into a 3-day project. I work in the events department for a large company. Projectors, microphones, computers, etc. If it was required for an event, then we handled it. And it probably passes through my workflow for helping to organize. My department also handles catering for events. While it's not my team specifically, we work side by side. The associated director runs the catering and events coordinator. My manager only runs the AV side, but doesn't report to the associated director. Don't ask, it's a messed up org chart that nobody can make sense of. Despite it not being specifically part of my job description, I also do the technical side of getting new staff members online within our system, getting their staff account created, and also getting Teams and OneDrive online on their mobile so they can see all their paperwork. The reason why I'm happy to do this is because with the catering team being a revolving door of staff, normal in my industry, getting them online needs to be done immediately and fast. You can go to the great IT team to do this, but you could be waiting days for them to get around to it. Whereas I can do it within 5 to 10 minutes with them. And staff that aren't online on our system can't work. H&S forms are part of this setup. Therefore, they wouldn't be able to complete their assigned shift, and IT won't touch the request until they show up for their first shift, at which point you'd then wait days for them to get onto it. See the flaw in the logic? Note, setting up a new account also involves setting up their personal work email, group email access, system permissions access, and to a limited extent, their access to card swipe permissions. Normally this would all be done by the security team, but 10 years at this company really comes with its perks of being connected to the right people. And when you want to get something like this done fast, it's often easier for one person with permissions to do it as opposed to multiple people in their workflows. Second note, if you're asking why a rotating door of catering staff needs personal work emails and group emails, this account setup is supposed to encompass more than just them. Well, recently my boss has thrown another bout of trying to micromanage the hell out of my team. We all hate it, but I guess we could just ride out out the wave again. The associated director asked me to go to one of our offices on the other side of the city to set up a group of new staff with one large batch order. My owner looked at the request, got one of those time for some micromanagement shenanigans faces. I said, "Hey boss, associate director wants me to go to the other office to set up some new staff in the system next week on Friday." No. I need you here in case something happens, OP. Very busy day on that day. There's nothing on the roster for that day. I'd still be available remotely. Just write the associated director a document about how to get people set up in the system. He can do it himself. Are you sure? I can do it fast because I'm trained on the system and he isn't. Including travel, I'd only be gone about 3 to 4 hours. Writing the document on how to get someone set up in the system would take much longer. Write the document and put everything he needs to know in it. It only needs to be what? Half a page? Can't be that hard. Everything? Alright, cue malicious compliance. What my boss expected was a half-page instruction manual on getting a new account created within the system. I don't think I could have kept it that short even if I tried. What followed was a 3-day project writing out the instruction manual for how to get someone set up in the system, which was comprised of 34 pages, not half a page. Large portions of it were troubleshooting steps, accounting for different modules of phones, and likely fixes when they do weird things. iPhones are great because they work. The infinite variations of Android phones can sometimes throw up strange errors either on the system or within the phone itself. Most of the information here was collective knowledge I've built up over the years, as well as who else to phone in IT for those most outrageous issues that had to be solved that I didn't have permission for, and who could genuinely do it immediately. I warned the associate director that this was going to be a very large technical manual and he should probably read it before heading into the office. Isn't it like half a page? My boss said to put everything in it. Oh no. What followed was the associate director attempting to take somewhere between 10 to 20 people through this very technically written manual about getting someone set up in the system. To anyone who is not technically inclined, this could have just been a different language. After 30 minutes, he called me up, put me on speakerphone with the camera to the new staff and said, just do it. Sitting at my computer, I spent the next 40 minutes getting everyone online. Technical support over a phone can be straining, if you know what I mean. And they were all fine to start their shifts. Finally, the associate director asked me something in private afterwards. OP, did it really need to be that complicated? Actually, I summarized some of the sections to make it easier. I didn't want to make it difficult for you, wasn't my intention, but my boss told me to write everything down, so I did. Good to know, thanks. Following that weekend, I was notified that I was requested to go to a new staff member setup. I should find time when I'm available and go do it, irrespective of other tasks. Not sure what happened up top, but I think my boss got a very heavy smack for it. But let me know. Am I the jerk? Oh man, being the computer guy at some companies with employees who don't often use computers can be a pain. At my old job, we had a lot of lifers, people who have been with the company for over 30 years, so when it came time to get them to do updates on the computer, we would have to make sure that their area would be covered because someone was going to have to show them and walk them through the whole process. If one of your employees knows a fast way to do something and it's done properly, just let them do it instead of micromanaging. It will save you a lot of stress in the long run. My boss tells me to start using icebreakers to talk to customers to start to get them to buy stuff. Some of them get the wrong signal. So the story is over a decade old. Back when I was fresh out of college and dedicated to doing nothing for as long as possible, I worked for an electronics store, a big one, and lasted there for about 18 months before I realized I was wasting my time on garbage pay that I ended up blowing on games and movies. My manager, Bob, was a pretty decent guy, and I never had too many complaints about him. Although he was wasted at this particular store because he was a pretty good manager. I could tell he was getting a lot of flack from the GM, Jim, because home theater sales, which was me, were stagnant. Clarification, good but not growing, and not hitting our ridiculous quotas. I worked in the morning until afternoons when there was about 10 people visiting the department in total, and you could tell that 8 of them were just watching TV waiting for their spouse's cell phone plan to be activated. Unfortunately, since there was so little foot traffic, management's decision was to drill into us how to use every marketing/customer manipulation tactic to encourage people to buy things. I was a good salesperson. I could sell the crap out of a home theater using tactics such as getting customers to use their imagination about their option, or presenting new options in ways they hadn't considered. I listened, I learned about their needs, and what they were looking for, and they frequently left the store with something completely different than what they thought they needed. I recalled the number of returns I had was so small that I could probably count them on both of my hands over 18 months. I, however, was completely freaking disinterested in marketing tactics, sales tactics, or manipulating customers for upsells, or changing how I communicated with them to speak their language in a way that marketing showed increased sales, but was blatantly manipulative. Screw that. So when Jim tells Bob about their new push to encourage customers to buy things they normally wouldn't buy, he knows I'm going to be a challenge, but he does a pretty good job at trying to convince me. He comes to me while we're at a floor meeting, and he asked me to try to break the ice with the customers by chatting them up a little bit about topics unrelated to their viewing habits, home theater, etc., to get them to like me enough to want to make a purchase. Malicious compliance time. I was ready to quit and move on. I was no longer interested in playing this game. He wanted me to try to break the ice with people, so I started flirting with all the customers. Black, white, guy, girl, rich, not rich, old, not old. Everyone got a smile and compliment about their outfit, and I could pair them to a celebrity that they reminded me of, if possible. I was good at it too. I kept it completely mild and inoffensive. Our uniforms were really blah, and I wasn't really trying, but on more than one occasion, a bored older woman or housewife gave me their phone number. Overall, numbers started going down because I was busy chatting with customers over making sales. So eventually, I got hit with a secret shopper and the jig was up. Bob finds out about this from Jim, and I can hear him laughing from across the store before coming to the department to ask me to go to the back of the store for a private meeting. He wrote me up for inappropriate communication with customers. I told him I wasn't going to sign the write-up report because I had received no directive saying I couldn't flirt with customers. It wasn't a violation of the employee handbook either. I made sure. And I never said anything that was offensive or sexual, even though several customers took it in that direction. But more importantly, I was giving my 2 weeks notice, but if the write-up was a deal breaker, I could leave now. Bob was sad that I was leaving, but understood. Jim was pissed that I was leaving because I was a good earner, even though the department goals were ridiculous. There's not a lesson from this for managers out there, so don't read into it. I was just a clever jerk. But let me know your thoughts. Am I the jerk in this situation? I actually really like this malicious compliance. When I worked retail at a big warehouse store, we oftentimes had to push upgraded memberships, and I absolutely hated it. I just wanted to be a good cashier, not a salesperson that tried to push things on people that didn't need it. So I find this OP's malicious compliance hilarious. Also score for picking up some ladies' numbers.
When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.